Members are on Zoom, and any member of the public who wish to join us, I believe, is on YouTube. So first I want to acknowledge Diana Lopera. Diana, you want to wave? Great. And she is a DLNR Vista member. And then Megan Gonzalez, who is a Kupu member. Megan, you want to wave your hand? There we go. All right. Diana is going to go over the Zoom logistics, and then we'll do the roll call. Go ahead, Diana.
All right, aloha mai kako. My name is Diana. I will be covering logistics for today's meeting. Just for the record, we are currently being recorded on our YouTube live stream as well as this Zoom platform. So just a couple logistics. If you haven't done so already, please rename yourselves to include your name and affiliation. If you are having any troubles with that, please feel free to send me a message and I can help you out with that. Secondly, please keep your mics muted unless prompted to speak so we can avoid any distractions throughout the meeting. And lastly, unless you are a commission member or staff, please keep your videos off unless you are a speaker during when you are called. Yeah. So if you have any other technical issues for the meeting, please feel free to send me a message and I will be more than happy to help. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Diana. I'm Mary Alice Evans, and I'm the co-chair with my co-chair, Suzanne Case, who is also on the call. Now I'm going to do the roll call. I'm just going to call your name, and you can either wave or say here or whatever you prefer. Chair Suzanne Case. She waved. There we go. Senator Mike Gabbard.
Aloha.
Aloha, my Senator. Senator Lorraine Inouye. Representative Nicole Lowen.
Hi, aloha, I'm here.
Great, thank you. Representative David Tarnas.
Aloha, everyone.
Thank you. Executive Director Sylvia Hussey, or CEO Sylvia Hussey for OHA, or a representative for OHA. Okay. Nancy McPherson.
Aloha.
I see you, Nancy. And Marianne Rossio from the Department of Health. Thank you, Marianne. Catherine Payne, or designee from the Department of Education. Thank you. Lynn Araki Regan for the Department of Transportation.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. Is there a representative for the HTA? For DBED, Scott Glenn.
Aloha, Scott Glenn here.
Thank you, Scott. For the Department of Agriculture, Phyllis Shimabukuro Geyser.
Aloha, I'm present.
Thank you, Phyllis. For HAIMA, designee to the Adjutant General, Luke Myers.
Good afternoon, Mary Alice.
Good afternoon, Luke. For Kauai County Planning Department, Ka'aina Hall.
Here.
There you are. For the City and County of Honolulu Department of Planning and Permitting, Dean Uchida.
Harrison Rue is on for Director Uchida. He had a conflict.
Thank you, Harrison. For the Hawaii County Planning Department, Zendo Kern.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha, Zendo. And for Maui County Planning designee, Jeff Dack.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jeff. Okay, that concludes the roll call. We're going to move to the next item, which is the discussion and approval of the April 7th, 2021 meeting minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes? Okay. Any questions, concerns, or comments?
Mary Alice.
Yes.
I
Yes.
was present. This is David Tarnas. I was present at that meeting. If it could be so noted in the attendees, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll make that correction. Any other corrections or additions? If not, are there any objections to accepting the meeting minutes of April 7th, 2021? Hearing none, the meeting minutes are accepted as circulated with the correction noted by Representative Tarnas. We're going to move on to our next item, draft statement on climate ready Hawaii. And I'm going to turn this one over to our state climate change coordinator, Anu Hittel. Go ahead, Anu. Oh, is your audio stuff fixed by now?
My audio?
Yes, there you go.
My audio was always fixed, but thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. You know me already, but let me just for the record introduce myself. I am Anu Hittel, the coordinator for the statewide commission. And for this item, I'm eager to present to you a draft statement on resilient infrastructure for a climate-ready Hawaii. So it should have been in your meeting packet that was sent to you. Otherwise, we can also put links in the chat. So if perhaps Diana or Megan could do that, that would be great. I'll do a quick recap of the main points of the statement. It aims to provide guidance to all Hawaii state and county governments and their agencies and recommendations on how to translate Hawaii's robust climate policy framework to decision-making and investments to address the current climate emergency. The statement also highlights work being done, relevant legislation, and as federal funds are being readied for disbursement, where Hawaii needs to be poised to receive and deploy them to the maximum advantage of our communities and people. Reflecting the intent of the American Jobs Plan to create good-paying union jobs, tackle the climate crisis, grow the economy sustainably and equitably for decades to come. Let's see, so there are 4 areas that are outlined to provide a sense of general direction for the future. The first climate ready priority A, just first as in number 1, not in like it's the first priority. The ambitious mitigation of greenhouse gases through elimination and reduction of emissions. Priority B, the preservation of our cultural, biological, and public resources through adaptation. Priority C, the accelerated sequestration of carbon, production of local foods, and sorry, not carbon production, carbon, comma, production of local foods and protection of public health and ecosystems. Priority D, the adoption and building of resilience to climate change. And these are just bullet points taken straight from the statement. So today you'll also hear 4 presenters, Katie Rooney from Ulupono Initiative. Actually, I'm sorry, that's 3 presenters, Katie Rooney, Ulupono Initiative, CJ Johnson from DOH, Nicole Cernowski from Oahu MPO. And while the presentations that follow are focused on transportation, this is just one example of those 4 priorities. The statement also encompasses, as you know, infrastructure in all areas of climate action, mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and sequestration. So with that, I will just hand it over actually to Senator Lee, who needs no introduction, but will introduce that transportation section. And then after that, in that order, Katie, CJ, and Nicole will be presenting. Thank you.
Thanks very much. This is Chris Lee. Forgive me, I'm on limited bandwidth here, so if I cut out, somebody text me. But very briefly, I really want to thank Anu and the commission for, I think, taking this up. A couple of meetings ago, I had asked a question about support for the potential federal dollars that are coming into Hawaii and how we can at least put a climate lens onto some of those to make sure that we're able to take advantage and address some of these critical issues while we have the opportunity before it slips us by. And now, several months later, that is more urgent than ever. I've been in DC just a couple of weeks ago, meeting with some of our federal counterparts, as well as our federal administration and some of their key deputies working on this stuff. And it's pretty clear that we have an enormous opportunity because we are perhaps one of the most affected states when it comes to climate change and have a great case to make. We've also been doing a lot of work there, but also we are perhaps one of the furthest behind. And unlike a number of other states, which are months and in some cases years ahead of us, preparing for the receipt of federal resources to be able to not only disperse immediately that might come through, hopefully I don't jinx it, an infrastructure package in the next couple months, but also as the administration's retooling a lot of its other lines of funding generally through the U.S. Department of Transportation, a lot of their grant programs, which are pivoting to focus on climate and underserved communities and all these various things that I think we've been hoping for some time. Those are all going to be competitive amongst the various states. So we're going to have to position ourselves. And in that respect, I think we are quite far behind. And I just spent the last week with some of the cabinet members from the state of California, which just announced its version of transportation climate road mapping, which is called CAPTI. And what it basically does is put the state on record to position itself not only for laying out projects into the future that truly do address climate, but also put themselves on the record with a plan and a pipeline so that federal dollars coming in through the infrastructure plan, as well as stuff they can apply for, will be right at the top of the list. And that's something I think we in Hawaii can really try to take advantage of, but time is short. So that said, a couple of things that they're looking at, I'll put this in a link to this in the chat, perhaps afterward, and give to others to distribute, is basically looking beyond what they're doing right now and sort of the existing stuff that we also in Hawaii have been doing. And so just to read a brief excerpt to give you a sense of what this looks like for them, I'm going to quote out of the executive summary here briefly. Highway investments over many years have contributed to a dependence on automobiles, supporting development patterns that have made walking, cycling, and public transit use inefficient, challenging, and sometimes dangerous in many parts of the state. These investments have also contributed to the displacement and division of some neighborhoods and imposed noise, emissions, and safety hazards on many others. Further research over the past several decades has demonstrated that capacity expansion has not resulted in long-term congestion relief, and in some cases has worsened congestion, particularly in urbanized regions. And these sorts of projects in urbanized areas that add travel lanes result in changes in travel behavior due to a short-term reduction in travel time and improved reliability. This phenomenon, known as induced travel, explains why adding capacity has rarely succeeded in reducing congestion over the long term or supported of alternatives to driving and more transportation efficient land uses. So long story short, they're sort of flipping it on its head. And in their priority, they're looking at public transit, they're looking at pedestrian, bike alternative infrastructure, safety, and climate. And this is something that I think the legislature this year, having passed several bills and resolutions, some of which are, I think, referenced in this climate statement, has started to put in place, but we really need to, I think, drive it home. And the Climate Commission is, I think, the one voice that can squarely sort of capture it. So really want to just offer thanks for that consideration and happy to turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you. So Katie is actually going to present on the vehicle economy report. And Katie, if you will just give people a couple of lines about yourself at first, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. So my name is Kathleen Rooney Katie. I am the Director of Transportation Policy and Programs at Ulupono Initiative. And actually, I talk a little bit about who we are for those of you that don't know us, but I've been focusing a lot on basically just large scale transportation emissions reductions and sort of that space. And I think Senator Lee's discussion about some of the costs associated with those decisions are actually some of the things I'm going to dive into today. So I am going to share my screen, and Anna, you will tell me if I get it wrong, hopefully. I'm notorious for doing this poorly. Are we good? Okay, great.
We're good.
So thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to dive in a little bit today about the costs of the vehicle economy here in Hawaii. For those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are a Hawaii-based impact investment firm, and we make for-profit and nonprofit investments in Hawaii's self-sufficiency and resiliency. And we do this in a few different sectors, things like local food, water and waste management, renewable energy, and clean transportation. And I lead our transportation strategy, which for sustainability and resiliency really focuses on reducing fuel emissions and imports. And so I think, it's helpful to sort of understand the framing around this, why we took this study if we're focused on emissions, but we're really talking about costs. And so I'm going to walk through a little bit about that because I think it's really helpful. And I know as the Climate Change Commission, there's probably a bunch of you that probably already know this, but I still think it's helpful to give that perspective. And I think the big thing is that we really can't become sustainable without tackling ground transportation. Over the past 20 years, all the other sectors have dropped in their emissions except ground transportation. So you can see the line at the top is the total. And then the green is the ground transportation, which is pretty much just hung out in the same space since the 1990s. I'm sure some of it has gone down in terms of efficiencies, but then offset by population growth and some of our larger vehicles and those sorts of things. And there's really sort of a few ways to address this problem. One is fuel efficiency. Another is the carbon content of fuel. And then the third is sort of the total vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. So fuel efficiency is essentially dictated through federal policy. It's kind of hard to deal with it at a state level. The second one of the carbon content of fuel is definitely possible through the electrification of transportation, which does get us part of the way. And we have a really great history here within electrification, but you still can't get there without starting to tackle transportation demand. And as you can see, since the 90s, that's been steadily increasing and is projected to continue to increase into the future. So it's really going in the wrong direction of where we need it to go. So that kind of talks a little bit about this particular problem, but then why sort of deal with it? Well, this is from Transcending Oil, specifically on the impacts associated with the transportation space. And as you can see, like road pricing has the ability to really address VMT quite effectively. But then that does sort of leave you with, well, how do you start to tackle the road pricing strategies if you don't have a great handle on what's being spent where and the implications of that? So we originally thought we would just sort of parse through public budgets, but that seemed insufficient. And I won't lie, a little soul crushing. So I guess it's actually about 2 years ago now, there was a report from the Harvard Kennedy School that actually tackled this spending and cost issue from a top-down perspective. And the person who really guided a lot of this work, their expertise is actually assigning costs for all different types of problems in areas where the information may not be super clear. But their number came back at $64 billion a year, which is quite a lot of money. And if you sort of took that number either through our lane miles or the population, you would end up with $18 to $13 billion a year here. And, of that, about 50% of that would be public funds. And that's a really big number to kind of sort of talk about for this vehicle economy. And it's also usually pretty helpful to explain what we mean by that. It's sort of an intuitive term, but just to make sure we're really clear, is that this is all the roadway, bridges, transportation infrastructure costs, bridges, on-ramps, speed bumps, parking, all that fun stuff, as well as the associated costs of pollution and congestion that result from the use of this ground transportation system. So it's a pretty broad brush, and it's really meant to be a holistic approach. And so we have this idea of what it potentially could be the vehicle economy in Hawaii, but we really wanted to know for sure. And so some of the things that sort of guided our application of this methodology here was that it had to be comprehensive. Similar to the Massachusetts, we wanted to be able to show a fairly comprehensive set of costs around the vehicle economy. It had to be easy and defensible. So this is actually a fairly conservative methodology. And it's really a simple cost aggregation approach. So it's not a complex model. So in some cases, models like step 1 has some uncertainty that gets built into step 2, that gets built into step 3. all of those steps are sort of independent and on their own. So there's not that sort of aggregated uncertainty and complexity. It had to be Hawaii based, not like our extrapolations, but what were the costs here and what did they data say? And that it also had to be replicable so that so that we and others could actually do it year over year and potentially see changes at a higher level across the state. I am not going to walk through every single piece of what we did. I'm going to give you some of the highlights and the key takeaways. Some of this is due to the time that the presentation we wanted to give, which was a shorter one. And some of this is that we have an incredibly detailed appendix that if you have any questions, you can go and check that out. And it does cover the costs that we included, the quantification and the monetization steps, as well as all the sources. So, although I'm always more than happy to answer questions further along as well. So when you put this all together here in Hawaii, we have quite a large number. It's $21.8 billion, which similar to the Massachusetts, about 51.2% is in the public costs, which are broadly covering the direct budgetary costs, the indirect social and economic costs, and the value of the lands and the opportunity cost of those lands. And then there's about 48.8 in consumer-borne costs, which is the cost of vehicle ownership and the value of the residential home and home-based parking, which I think that's usually the number that most people think. But as you can see, that's only really half of what we spend on that. And just as a quick shout out to ICF International, who really helped develop the tool and do all the analysis and the spreadsheets and all that fun stuff on this particular project. And so we also did sort of assign the cost by county. This reflects the distribution of lane miles, but it does sort of show how that plays out a little bit more. It's not as, we were hoping for something a little bit more detailed and maybe a little bit more specific, but it was really hard to come up with something more than these types of estimates. Not surprising, Honolulu is about 66%. And then on the public costs, you'll see here, this is sort of where the bulk of the detailing, I think, comes in. You'll note that the direct budgetary costs are at 14%, the indirect social and economic costs are at 51% of that, and then 35%. And this is out of the 11.2 billion, not the whole. And then what can we sort of take away from some of these public costs? I think one is that the direct public costs are the smallest percentage, but they really have some major cost implications as well as quality of life implications. Another one is that when we calculated it, the user fees actually only cover about 49% of the public expenditures. So they, in terms of the people using the system, paying for the system, that doesn't appear to be clear. When you add up all those things and sort of just divide it by taxpayer or household, we're looking at about $15,000 per taxpayer, about $24,400 per household, which is a very significant amount of money. And I think one of the other things we noted was that the maintenance backlog is about twice the state CIP investment, and with sea level rise and the adaptation expenditures that are sort of expected is going to continue to grow. So what we're looking at is sort of a structural problem where the funds that we have for the system we want are not, and the system we are likely to have to maintain are not matching up by a pretty significant amount. This isn't in the margins. When we talk about the private costs, this is the one thing that's sort of used more of a modeled approach. It does not take all the individual types of cars and then assign some cost values to them. We actually sort of took the 5 most popular cars in the state and then just sort of use that as a proxy for the entire set of vehicles in operation. When you add those things together, it comes out to about 8,100 per vehicle, or about 16,200 per household. When you take both these private and public costs, what we end up on individual sort of household impacts, we're looking at $31,200 per year. And just to sort of put that in context, that's about 39% of the median household income here in Hawaii. So it's a pretty significant amount of money that I would say has not been necessarily well, I don't think people know that. Let me put it that way. And then some of the conclusions from our work. So I think one of the big things is that full costs matter. We can't just look at our investments from a direct budget cost. There is a lot more to it, about 80% more to it. That really does determine people's cost of living, their quality of life, whether or not we're meeting our climate goals, and a whole host of other things. Another one is it's really an unsustainable investment strategy. At this point in time, the user fees aren't covering it, which means it's coming from other places or it's being spent in other ways. And we're just not necessarily lining up the costs and the benefits appropriately. Another one is that land is expensive for people, but not for cars. Some of you may know that I also do a lot of work in parking, but this is a statement that comes across in parking, but it's still very much true in this case, is that some of these expenses are what we could do with that land otherwise. And that a lot of times people aren't paying for it as a motorist, but rather in other ways. And I think the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that transportation is a huge part of our cost of living, but doesn't necessarily get the same high level focus. I think we, in the affordable housing space can talk about how we really can't build anything for less than $300,000 a unit. And that's if the land is free. And notwithstanding the pandemic, we're not necessarily great at raising people's wages, but we do know how to make a life here in which you don't necessarily have to own a car or as many cars. And I think it's really important to talk about that as a way of reducing the cost of living. And I was a smidge over, but I really, really tried. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie. It was right as I was texting you and saying, wrap up.
Oh.
So that's good. Thank you very much. And so I think that leads us into some other kinds of costs. And CJ Johnson is going to talk about that. He's going to talk from DOH. He's going to talk about about Vision Zero, safety, accessibility, and climate change. So with that, CJ, if you would also just introduce yourself, take a couple of lines there, and then go into your presentation, that would be great.
You bet. Give me 1 second to set my screen here and get going. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. My name is CJ Johnson. I'm the physical activity coordinator for the Hawaii State Department of Health. I know some folks hear physical activity coordinator and assume that I'm a physiologist or a sports medicine expert. Actually, my background is in transportation planning and in advocacy for mobility justice. So over the past several years, CDC and DOH's strategy for promoting physical activity has shifted from primarily encouragement to a much heavier focus on the built environment and what we call the social determinants of health. What we now understand is that where you live, its design, environmental and social factors, and transportation systems that you depend on to connect you to healthy food, healthcare, education, jobs, worship, recreation, and civic participation have a huge influence on your health outcomes. The Department of Health recently published our Healthy Hawaii Strategic Plan 2030 update, and our physical activity goals and objectives are all based in the environment, built environment and policy, or as we call them in the plan, community design and access. We are not alone in rethinking these connections and updating the strategies that we're employing to reach population health. One of the best examples of how cities and states are reimagining public health, built environment, transportation, mobility is a campaign you've probably heard of called Vision Zero. It is a popular brand at the moment. The state of Hawaii and 3 of our 4 counties have committed to Vision Zero in some form, so of scores of cities across the world. In some circles, it's called safe systems. You may have heard that term. In 5 years, we may call it something different. You're already starting to see, I think, in cities that have committed to it but not followed through, that some of the luster of the brand name Vision Zero is starting to fall off. But the core principles are really starting to gain some support, and I think they continue to be really urgent and relevant to the conversation that we're having. Vision Zero is often described as progressive or radical, but its core premise is very simple and very humane, and that's that traffic deaths are unacceptable, avoidable, and preventable. That's all it is. And if that's true, it stands to reason that we should be trying to eliminate them, right? And so Vision Zero says, yeah, we should. It's a systemic commitment to eliminate traffic fatalities by a set date. That's all Vision Zero is. So when I hear Vision Zero is unrealistic or it's radical, I tend to respond to that with a little bit of historical context. And to do that, I have to go back about 100 years to the early 1920s. In the early 1920s, there was a widespread panic about the sheer scale of motor vehicle deaths in the US. And if you can't make that out in some detail, that's the Grim Reaper driving a car over the bodies of children. This is a pretty well-known call to action by Secretary Hoover, who put on a conference, one of the first traffic safety conferences. At the time, there were a lot of proposed solutions, right? Including requiring cars to have internal speed governors, banning cars from city centers, stringent liability rules for cars, transit priority and design in cities. But what we got instead was a PR campaign. designed by an industry group called Motordom, whose strategy to address traffic violence looked like this. They invented the term and the crime jaywalking. So back then, for some context on what jaywalking is, Jay was a term akin to hick or rube, right? So if you were a Jay, you were unsophisticated and didn't understand that cities were for cars and streets were for cars. And if you got in the way, well, that was your own fault, right? It was up to you to stay out of the way of these vehicles. So the strategy amounted to changing the narrative of responsibility from this new threat to from the actual obvious demonstrable hazard to essentially making fun of and pointing fingers at the victims of traffic violence. So whether you think that worked or not kind of depends on what you think the goal was. We have sold a lot of cars in the century since jaywalking was invented and a lot of oil. We have transformed many of our communities to be staggeringly inhospitable to walking, to wheeling, to active living in general. We have made automobility a requirement for full participation in most of America, including much of Hawaii. On the other hand, traffic crashes in the US kill the equivalent of a fully loaded 747 crashing with no survivors every 3 days. We are better at launching people across the country in rocket buses than we are at designing cities where people can get to work safely and consistently. It turns out we've also spent nearly a century rationalizing and normalizing traffic deaths as inevitable collateral in the name of progress and convenience. The transportation systems we rely on to connect us to needs and resources routinely carry a death penalty for minor lapses in judgment or attention. And we are, by and large, fairly complacent about it. We are so complacent about it that asserting that traffic deaths are unacceptable, avoidable, and preventable is a radical position. So as a little bit of an example here. Earlier this month, there was a news story, probably folks saw it, about a pedestrian fatality in Kaimuki. Person was walking in a marked crosswalk and by all indications had the right of way when he was hit by a drunk driver and later died. The coverage went to some effort, all of the coverage that I saw went to some effort to inform us that both the pedestrian and the driver were alcohol impaired. Here's the thing, walking drunk isn't illegal, right? No crime there. There's nothing that prohibits one from doing that. And in fact, I would argue you can learn a lot about a city's commitment to safety for vulnerable users based on how safe it is to get home drunk. And to understand why, you have to think about what we mean by vulnerable users. And here's a couple of examples. In the US, people with disabilities, especially people with wheelchairs, are killed at significantly higher rates than the general public. Here in Hawaii, older adults are dramatically overrepresented in our pedestrian fatality figures. They account for 15% of our population, but over 40% of our pedestrian deaths. This is a map in San Jose, but I think it's relevant to a lot of cities. In orange are our communities of concern and census tracts with a concentration of low income and minority households. And in blue is the 3% of city streets that account for over 50% of fatal car crashes. You can see there's a huge overlap, right, in terms of where people live and who lives there and how safe it is for them to get around. So what we see from that is that barriers, gaps, and deficiencies that put intoxicated pedestrians at risk put vulnerable users with cognitive or mobility impairments or who are low literacy or low English proficiency at heightened risk as well. And we should not accept that a death sentence is an inevitable and routine consequence for people with imperfect judgment as road users. The truth is that most US bike and pedestrian safety campaigns and measures, particularly the ones that place the burden on victims like bike helmets, safety flags, promoting bright clothing, jaywalking, distracted walking crackdowns, even things like most of our exotic pedestrian overpasses are not actually about safety. They're about narrative. They're about avoiding the truth that underpins the past half century or century of transportation planning in the US. And it goes like this: we are complacent with an acceptable and inevitable and routine amount of carnage from our transportation systems. And we are unwilling to invest in strategies and policies that will curb it completely because they're inconvenient to our entitlement to frictionless, subsidized car travel, segregated suburban land use, and ample free parking. And to justify that, for almost 100 years now, our social norming of responsibility, our narrative, when a vulnerable road user is harmed, has been the victim was not wearing a bike helmet. The victim was listening to music on their headphones, were wearing dark clothes, was walking while intoxicated. They did not walk 3 blocks out of their way to a marked crosswalk, or didn't use pedestrian safety flags. We have shifted the burden of responsibility so far onto the victim that media, police, juries, legislatures all start from an implicit bias that a vulnerable user has to take extraordinary measures to protect themselves as road users and use streets at their own risk. If they don't, they are part of that routine collateral. So historically, the responsibility for traffic safety has lain with transportation and law enforcement agencies. What Vision Zero tells us is that, again, media, public health, social services, schools, community organizations, social service groups, and public officials have to be actively engaged, not just sign off on it and leave it to transportation officials, but we all have to be at the table. Vision Zero means everything is on the table, and for that to be on the table, everyone has to be at the table. From a planning and engineering perspective, there's not much mystery to the steps that we need to take to cure traffic violence. We can do the design and engineering work that would put us on the right track. The solutions are the same solutions that were proposed and ignored 100 years ago. Traffic crashes are the leading preventable cause of childhood death in the US, not because we're bad engineers or planners or advocates, or because we don't have the technology. The real problem is that we have not yet decided unwaveringly that traffic violence is a problem worth solving. And there's no tech, no enforcement strategy, no outreach campaign, no congestion mitigation plan that will result in mobility justice that will compel us to center the dignity and value of all users. Vision Zero is a chance to put those values at the heart of our mobility. Are we ready? I don't know. I mean, we don't have a date. We don't have the coalitions in place. We don't have shared language. But what I like to say is, and what I like to think is that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the second best time is today. So I think it's time for us to really take seriously this shift in how we think about mobility justice and our mobility in general. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, CJ. There are some questions also wanting sort of a more direct link, perhaps, to climate change. And maybe you could speak to how mobility justice, just take a minute to just make that link, how mobility justice helps us with our climate change goals.
Yeah, I think that's where the greatest overlap in terms of bang for our buck is, right? I think there's a lot of interest. There are solutions on transportation safety or public health, which is my field, or sustainability, that may have marginal benefits or even some benefits that are meaningful, but that aren't sort of aligned with those overlapping goals, right, of economic and equity justice, sustainability, health justice, and where I think we get the most bang for our buck in terms of systems change and priorities change and values change that does help with transportation equity, mobility justice, that does help with public health, that does help with safety, and it does help with the environment, is that mode shift, right? It's changing our behaviors and changing our norms away from the victim blaming, away from consumer-based solutions to values-based solutions. So I think that's why I'm involved in this conversation, interested in this conversation. It's a just mobility, right?
Thank you for that. So we are showing sort of the full 2 FERs or the 3 FERs or whatever, all the overlaps with a resilient, clean, equitable transportation system or mitigation work that we're doing. So that's why the vehicle economy costs, the costs of how we are, what that does to our health, our climate, and so on, and accessibility, safety, etc. So and I think so we'll have there'll be some time for questions, but I just want to move it quickly to the Oahu MPO staff. And again, we're just focusing on transportation as an example over here because there were all these different there are all these different, the transportation reauthorization, Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act and so on are coming up. And so just wanted to use that as an example for other resilient infrastructure as well. But just going straight into Oahu MPO staff, I think it's Nicole Cernarski who's here from there to present. Nicole, do you need to present some slides?
Yes, hi Anu, this is Nicole.
Hi.
I'm going to try and share the presentation. Not super great with using Zoom, but hopefully this works out.
There we go, we can see it.
Yes, all right, perfect. So good afternoon. This is Nicole Chernohorsky. I'm the Transportation Impact Analyst at Oahu MPO. And I'd like to quickly talk to you about transportation infrastructure spending on Oahu for the next 4 years. Since these remote meetings are a little bit anonymous and my camera's off today, I've added a more personal slide to kind of help introduce myself, but also try to get you to listen to what I say. Is science shown that sharing a little bit of personal information makes people tend to care a bit more about what you say. So getting your attention here. Before moving into the transportation sector, I actually spent the first half of my professional career as a scientist doing research on coral reefs around the world in India, Australia, but also the reefs of Palau. And although it looks exciting, it was actually a bit depressing because a lot of the, well, as you know, the coral reef ecosystems that I was trying to study were sort of dying right before my own eyes due to climate change, of course. And so since then, I've become extremely interested in the topic of climate change. And so I feel really excited and honored to be able to speak today here at the Hawaii Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation Commission meeting. So usually I would speak about corals at meetings such as this, but today I want to talk about an entirely different topic, which is however closely tied to climate change issues. And so even indirectly to coral reefs that I'm so passionate about. So leaving behind my job as a scientist, I traversed into transportation and now work for the Oahu MPO as a transportation impact analyst. The Oahu MPO, for those of you that have not heard about Oahu MPO, it's short for the Oahu Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is a federally mandated transportation policymaking organization. And it's responsible for coordinating transportation planning on Oahu. So starting on the left, the main duties that Oahu MPO has is to develop a regional transportation plan, which identifies visions, goals, and objectives for the island. And so you can kind of think of this as a document that sets the course for transportation for the next 25 years on Oahu. Another major responsibility of our organization is determining which transportation projects actually get funded and so ultimately built on Oahu. And when I'm going to talk about projects a lot. So when I say project, I mean things like building a road, repairing a bridge, adding a bike lane or walkway, but also things like purchasing buses, etc. And also I'm only referring to surface transportation. So that means no boats, no planes, really just surface transportation. So anyways, projects that are to be carried out on Oahu, they have to be listed in this document that I kind of want to talk to you today about real quick before I get into the actual bulk of this. So the document, the Transportation Improvement Program, often called the TIP, is kind of a financial document that lists projects that are to be carried out over the next 4 years on Oahu. And the document identifies funds that are to be used for those projects. And so once a project is on this TIP document, it means that the funds are identified and the project can start. Kind of a side note, Oahu MPO doesn't come up with the projects. It's only responsible for evaluating and scoring the projects and programming / identifying those funds that are to be used for them. And so the next few slides will be interesting, and I'll be talking about the funding for this new upcoming TIP for 2022 to 2025. And I'd like to share with you a summary of what kind of projects are being proposed for funding during those next 4 years. So as you'll see on this slide and also the next one, there's some pie charts that show how the funds on Oahu are being distributed among the different types of projects. Showing where our funds are being spent should reflect, of course, where our priorities currently lie. So for example, of course, if the goal was to have everybody bike to work, we would expect to see a lot of funds going into bike projects. Okay, so when we start at the top of the slide, you can see that in this new TIP for 2022 to 2025, we have 73 projects and a little bit over $2 billion that are anticipated to be available for those 73 projects. About half, about 1 billion is used for building the rail. The rail's received a special additional federal grant. So the grant funds can only be used for the rail and they can't be shifted to any other project where we to decide that we're not going to build a rail, for example, which oftentimes people get confused about that. So the rail funds are kind of separate funds. And so I'm going to leave that 1 billion rail money on the side here and look at the other the other remaining $1 billion. I'm doing this purposefully because otherwise everything is kind of skewed by that huge amount of rail funds, and we kind of can't see what's going on in terms of funding. So when you look at the pie chart here on this slide, you're looking at non-rail funds for Oahu for the next 4 years. And you can see that about 30% of those funds are being spent towards rail capacity projects. So that's the orange part of the pie chart. And roadway capacity, hopefully it's clear by now, but I'm just going to repeat this. So roadway capacity projects basically mean things like building a new road, adding an extra lane, or even things like restriping the road to add an extra lane. So basically, in lay terms, you could say that it's any project that allows more cars to kind of fit in that certain segment of the road. And you can see that the next largest piece of the pie, the blue one here, is about 28%. So 28% of that 1 billion goes to maintenance of highways, roads, and bridges. And then everything else is only getting about 10% or less of those funds. So we can also look at this $1 billion in a slightly different way. And we can look at the federal funds and the local funds separately. And we can see how these two types of funding, the federal and local, are being spent by the two main transportation agencies on Oahu, which are the Hawaii Department of Transportation, HDOT, on the left, and then the City and County of Honolulu on the right. Why it's important to look at the two types of funding is because federal funds have a lot of different categories. So certain types of funds can only be used for certain types of projects. And so there's a lot of strings attached to these federal funds and very little flexibility in how those federal funds can be used. On the other hand, the local funds, which are state and city funds, can theoretically be used for almost any type of project. And so there's a lot more flexibility there. And we can pretty much use those funds for whatever we decide. So I want to walk you through these charts real quick so we understand what we're looking at. So starting with the federal funds at the top, you can see that HDOT, the Hawaii Department of Transportation on the left, is spending a huge portion of federal funds on maintenance, which is partially due to the fact that maintenance was set as a very high priority by all the agencies. And then they're spending about 60% of the federal funds on safety projects. So for example, things like guardrail improvements, and then 13 on system operation and management. So think modernization of traffic signals, for example. The city, on the other hand, is spending most of the federal funds on transit related projects. So 24 of the transit, 24% goes to transit capital. So things like purchasing electric replacement buses. And then about 34% on operations and maintenance of transit, and another large portion of the city's federal funds going towards bike and pedestrian projects. And so this is not really surprising that the agencies are spending the funds this way and differently between the two agencies. It's partially driven by which agencies owns which roads, et cetera. But when we look at how the local funds are being spent, we see a stark contrast. So you see a big contrast between how the funds are being spent. So the two bottom charts look very different from the two top ones. And again, starting with the larger transportation agency, so HDOT, which has more funds and more projects. So the bottom left chart now, you see that almost 3/4 of local funds, or 75.8% local funds, are being spent on roadway capacity projects. And remember, roadway capacity projects are the one that are adding lanes or road, et cetera. On the right side, we see that the city is using 45% of local funds for roadway capacity again, which is rather high. So whether this is a great use of local funds, good or maybe not so good use, really depends on what we're trying to achieve and what our priorities are. And roadway capacity projects are important, especially in situations where there's new urban development, or you want to make sure that there's a road to leads to that area. But oftentimes roadway capacity projects, and especially on Oahu, are meant to address congestion. And I'm not going to go into huge detail onto this, but just a quick table here from our analysis shows that Well, the table basically shows what the congestion would be like if we didn't implement any of the 73 projects, which is that gray column there. And then what the congestion would look like if we implemented all these 73 projects that are in the tip, which is the green column. And what it basically says is that there would be a decrease in relative congestion by 1.2%, which is a decrease, but relatively small. And especially when you look at how much funding is going into those roadway capacity projects that are actually meant to relieve congestion, you can see that it's not a great decrease. And this is kind of in line with a lot of studies that show that roadway capacity projects often don't really help relieve congestion, mainly because they end up just increasing demand. And I guess, however, to sort of end on a slightly more positive note, I'm putting this extra slide here just to make sure that I also point out the positive things that are happening, because there are some projects that are really great. For example, the shoreline protection mitigation program, funds from that program are used to develop and construct shoreline protection measures to better protect roadways from flooding and erosion. We also have the transportation alternatives programs, which are programs that have funds in them that are dedicated purely to non-vehicular transportation projects. We've also had a Safe Routes to School program. And the goal of this program is to enable and encourage children, including those with disabilities, to walk and bike to school. And so the aim is to try and make bicycling and walking to school a safer and more appealing transportation alternative. Although this Safe Routes to School program is not in the current tip because there were no projects ready to go, as soon as those projects become more finalized, it's expected that the Safe Routes to School program is going to be re-added to the tip again. And finally, for the first time, Oahu MPO is actually evaluating projects based on whether they are in an area anticipated to be flooded due to sea level rise in the near future. And we've managed to push through a 6 feet sea level rise scenario instead of the more common 3 feet, just for extra caution, as a lot of the climate models are really conservative and the likelihood of sea level rise happening sooner is relatively high. So although I'm hopeful, I hope this kind of illustrated that our transportation sector is still quite not there and is going to need a bit of help in developing more tools that will help develop and prioritize projects that will help us move to a climate-ready Hawaii that I'm sure we all on a Hawaii essentially want. And so that is all from me. So thank you for your time and allowing me to speak to you here today. Mahalo.
Thank you, Nicole. And that was really interesting. And apologies, I've been mangling your last name, so you'll have to give me a tutorial offline. But
no worries.
I know
really
how it feels. Yeah, I know how it feels. So thank you for putting up with that. So that sort of brings us to the end of this segment, except I wanted to hand it just briefly back to Senator Lee, just to sum up if he had any other sort of thoughts in closing here. And then Senator, if you could hand it over to Mary Alice to co-chair Evans, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. And appreciate everybody sharing, especially the slides, because since I don't have bandwidth, I was hoping someone would. But suffice to say, I think clearly we have a long history, decades of history in the state of, when it comes to transportation, doing things sort of the same old way. And those investments, I think, have been reflected, as you've seen in some of the charts, and especially at the state level, where we're basically investing almost nothing into meaningful alternatives to transit that can get people around without polluting, without having to raise their cost of living, and in a much safer way. So this is sort of, I think, tying together those different pieces of safety as well as alternatives, and making sure that we're dealing with all of that so that it reduces all our emissions and vehicle miles traveled and everything else overall. I think it's pretty clear that with the kinds of investment that we're making, we've certainly earned our distinction as the place with the worst traffic in the country, looking at some of our highways, as well as the worst pedestrian fatality rates in the country when it comes to our kupuna. And of course, among the highest cost of transportation because everyone's forced to drive a car and there are very few alternatives that meaningfully provide transit for people in a safe manner. So trying to flip all that is going to take reinvesting in different ways. I think, as one of the speakers had alluded to, looking at alternatives, looking at Vision Zero, looking at all these other things, certainly electrification. And I bring this back to California and a number of the other states that we've been working with that have already taken these steps to sort of rethink the way that they're making these investments, especially because now we're all competing for federal funds that are going to be tied to some of these benchmarks. And we are in a pretty terrible place, frankly. And if we do not change rapidly, and I mean yesterday, we are jeopardizing our ability to compete meaningfully for a lot of the federal funding that we know we deserve here. So I think this discussion and I think the climate statement that's before us right now really helps, I think, tie it all together in a way that puts us at least in a decent position to make the argument that, yes, we're taking these issues seriously. Yes, we're looking at rethinking the way we do things and making the right investments in the kinds of projects that will address some of these top tier issues for climate, for safety, for the other things that both the federal government, as well as our state government and our counties have already committed to taking steps forward on. So I know in the statement, there's the kinds of projects talked about in this context. And I think that's very helpful because when we go for specific grant funding for whether it's safe routes to schools or alternative forms of transit or whatnot, we can point to this and say, yes, that's included. It's been referenced by this statement, and it's a nice package that we can hopefully drop into something that can pull down additional dollars while we have the opportunity. But time is short. I'll just emphasize that again, because already both at the state and the county, and they've already been working on a lot of this in the various departments, but particularly with Congress and where it's at, the federal government's at, we're basically out of time. Money's already essentially being lined up and spoken for. So the faster we can act, I think the better off we'll be. So mahalo for everybody taking the time and look forward to a good discussion.
May I ask your mic's on?
Thank you, Senator Lee. And Co-Chair Evans, if you wanted to take it from here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So let's have a discussion on the draft statement that is being proposed for action. Let's start with commission members, and then we'll move to the public and non-commissioners. And I want to note that we do have legislators here, and I want to hear from them if they have thoughts on this. Members, any thoughts or comments on the draft statement? Diana and Megan, if you'll let me know if someone has their hand up. Otherwise, you can just wave and I'll see if I can spot you visually. I'm not seeing.
I see Phyllis's hand up.
Okay, Phyllis followed by Jeff.
Thank you, Mary Alice. Aloha, fellow commissioners and members of the public. I support the draft. However, you know, the department is very cautious. We have concerns with whether the research cited will be applicable to the existing farming operations in Hawaii, whether it will be affordable to apply. And we don't want to have any competing concerns with the state's ability to increase local food production. You know, we have heard on the national level that some of the discussions regarding carbon sequestration and carbon bank for small farming operations is a challenge for them to afford. And most of all of our operations that exist today would be in that small category. We agree with the aspirational goals. However, without hearing from our stakeholders how the proposed research would impact their ability to maintain their operations or expand, which we want. That's our concern, but we do support the draft and I will vote for it.
Thank you, Phyllis. I appreciate your comments. Jeff.
Yes, thank you. Sounds like some great work. I think the draft sounds very good. Sounds like there's been a lot of work, coordination between the state and folks at City and County of Oahu. I must admit, maybe I'm out of the loop, but I'm not aware of similar coordination with the County of Maui. And that's not, just such it is. Now, hopefully there has been coordination with other folks that I'm not aware. But if not, and or if that's maybe the case with other counties, there might be some effort to bring us along. If there's that gap there, I just may not be aware of it. But I wanted to, to speak to Senator Lee's comment about action quickly. The time is now. The time was longer ago than yesterday. It seems like a very strong statement, good statement, but to just some change management, from Phyllis, there's some change management issues. What do we do, given our existing past policies? How can this square with stakeholders? These things take time, and it sounds like we don't have time. And so I don't know who has resources to be able to be putting thoughts into an implementation strategy for the statement, because that in my mind at least is a big gap, at least in questions in my mind. How do we get from these great ideas to actual implementation, given stakeholders, given kind of the what I perceive as a fairly significant reluctance to change that I've seen in at least my 16 years in the state of Hawaii. So it's gonna be, we got to get there. But I think there needs to be some effort, dedicated resources and effort to how do we actually do that, unless that's already in place and I just may not happen to be aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Other members of the commission, comments, thoughts? I don't see any hands raised. Nancy, go ahead. Nancy McPherson from DHHL.
Hi, on behalf of our deputy, Tyler Gomes, he and I went over this and we support the draft. And I also wanted to commend Anu and her staff for their outreach, consistent outreach to DHHL and inclusiveness and efforts to focus on equity and climate justice issues, including the awareness of potential regressive impacts of the transition to renewable energy sources, and also the inclusion and valuation of traditional ecological knowledge in the during the natural and working lands Hui discussions, and climate ready. I'm hoping that climate ready priority C will also include the knowledge and wisdom of indigenous peoples and traditional ecological knowledge. So mahalo.
Thank you, Nancy. Other members of the commission? If not, I'm going to move to members of the public. Diana, Megan. Yes, Sylvia Hussey with OHA. Go ahead, Sylvia.
I think Luke had his hand up, so I'm going to defer to Luke and then he can punt it back to me.
Great. Go ahead, Luke.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Sylvia. HIEMA and the Department of Defense support the document through recent grant applications, competitive mitigation, and with some climate-related themes. Building codes and land use tend to be the most strongest mitigation capabilities that we have. And the document could use some further enforcement of those two capabilities as we look at decadal projects the transportation presentation that we just, some of the infrastructure, we have sunk costs and none of these projects are done overnight. So maybe including some larger language on building codes and land use that supports some of this larger climate mitigation and adaptation could make the document a little bit stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Do you see that falling in climate ready priority D, the adoption and building of resilience to climate change?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, now Sylvia.
Thanks. I want to also affirm our support of the statement and then also build on Jack's comment regarding some implementation, Jeff's comment on implementation by priority. I think priority C and D resonates. Let's see, definitely priority C and just the holistic public health and social determinants of health and just being holistic. And so I appreciate that the implementation will be one of a community, county level type implementation. And so the Office of Foreign Affairs is definitely supportive of that kind of community-based orientation, particularly priority B in preserving cultural, biological, and public resources. There are a number of cultural, traditional access and practices that we want to uphold as well as protect, and that is impacted by climate change and access. So in whole, we support it and also want to be a part of a more tactical implementation effort, especially with a community and county orientation. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Harrison, followed by Scott Glenn.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to weigh in quickly on a couple of things that, both Senator Lee mentioned, as well as whoever was talking at the end about action. City is definitely putting our money where its mouth is, as you saw from some of those charts. But we don't need to be quite jealous of California. They may have their act together more in terms of the grant applications, but in terms of policy, all of the work around the rail stations and TOD and, Mary Lou working with your team on the state-wise, you're working with the neighbor islands as well on those principles. So I think we would score well on any applications based on the policy work, adopted zoning, mixed use investments, transit to support. Even before rail is, we're building a lot of housing developments along great bus lines already. The second part about the adaptation action, I'm going to show a slide at the end of my presentation later that has the link to the climatereadyoahu.org, our climate plan. And that's the climate folks at CCSR are actually going out into the community, farmers markets and things like that right now. Even if you're on a neighbor island, I encourage you to look at that on site at climatereadyoahu.org. So we're developing an action plan.
Thank you, Harrison. Scott, followed by Director Kern.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to voice my support for the motion. The energy efficiency gains of being able to do multimodal transportation is tremendous. And I think this is in line with, I don't remember the act number, but SB 1402, which Senator Lee was also a sponsor for. And as the Chief Energy Officer, I often meet with federal agencies, Department of Energy, foremost, as well as congressional committees on the upcoming infrastructure spending and ways that we can advance energy and climate mitigation. And having statements like this to point to are valuable tools to have at hand when those questions come up. So thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Zendo, followed by Lynn, followed by Senator Rhodes and Rep. Nicole Lowen.
Thank you, Co-Chair Evans. Hawaii County Planning Department generally supports the draft. I find it always challenging with some of these movements in the right direction as far as cost goes as well. And I want to make sure that we're mindful of that. I kind of want to echo what Luke was talking about as well, as far as upping the building codes, land use planning. I actually grew up completely off grid here on the Big Island, which is very unpopular back in the day. That's very popular nowadays. And one of the things I just want to make sure that as a commission that we're really thinking about, other than being very ready and being progressive, is how do we raise living wages? Because to me, that's a part of the overall sustainability, because we can't have our climate change efforts equate to our local residents and next generations having to leave the island. So to me, I really want to be mindful of that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity within this and areas for economic empowerment and improvement. So very much supportive and really excited to dig deeper into this commission and these efforts. And with that, our general plan, we're doing an update on that. So we're working on that land use side of it for Hawaii County. So big mahalos.
Thank you, Director Kern. Lynn Araki Reagan.
Just wanted to, on behalf of the State Department of Transportation, just echo our support for the draft plan. Want to thank Anu, along with co-chairs Evans and Case, along with our Transportation Committee Chair, Senator Lee, for working hard on this draft, and any other people involved in putting the draft together, which we support. In our presentation, later on during this meeting, we'll be sharing the various costs that we estimate to address a lot of these issues on behalf of our department. So anyway, thank you very much to all who made this draft possible.
Thank you, Lynn. Senator Rhodes.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I support it as well. Whenever you have a statement like this, I'm sure if you really drill down on it, any one of us could find something that we didn't particularly like, but I thought it was very well done. And I think it's really important to keep the pressure on. Obviously the stakes are really high, both for the islands and the whole globe. But, and we have had and we will have setbacks on various aspects of moving towards a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but I think this is a good step for where we are in the process now, and we need to take full advantage of the funding opportunities that are available. Hello.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Nicole Owen.
Hi, thanks. I just want to say I support it, and since a couple other people have gone back to give a few comments on the presentations, because we jumped really quickly to discussion of the statement, I wanted to thank the presenters. I think that this is a really important discussion. I really appreciated CJ's passion about multimodal transportation also. It's super important, and I appreciate that Senator Lee's working on this, and I think we all look forward to working together on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Amy Peruso, next.
Aloha. I just wanted to echo Senator Lee and Senator Rhodes's sentiments of urgency with respect to the statement. I do hope that it's adopted today, and in the process of moving forward, there can be some additional modifications that are made and adjustments. But I do think it's really critical to start the work now. It's my understanding that this commission meets again in November. So it would be good to get this work started now if possible. Mahalo.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Mike Gabbard.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think that the working paper and the draft statement were excellent. And I know there's some concerns by some of the commissioners, but I do believe that the draft is a big step forward, especially now. It's really going to help our state and our counties as we address climate change. So I support the draft and we'll vote for it.
Thank you, Senator. Other comments? Here, let's go see if I can see any more. Anyone else? Feel free to just speak up at this point if you have a comment.
At the appropriate time, I will have a minor suggestion to wording at one point.
I'm sorry, who was that?
This was Jeff Dack.
Oh, Jeff. Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate that.
I'll add a comment just in support. I thought the presentations were all really fascinating. Also, they're fast. A lot of information in that, in there, but I think what the combination of them and this discussion is trying to do is basically get us to do a little reset on our thinking. And I do think this is a really important opportunity and the right thing for the Climate Commission to have a voice on. I know that whenever we're making a strong decision about a direction, there are impacts to other priorities as well. So I'm sympathetic to those, and I know that as we work through them, we'll have to come to some balance on priorities where there are potential conflicts in implementing them. But I do think that, you know, overall, this climate issue is so overriding that it is a very appropriate thing for this commission to make a strong statement on.
Thank you, Chair Case. Others? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the draft statement. Is there such a motion at this time?
So move.
Okay, thank you, Representative Tarnas. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, is that Sylvia Hussey? Thank you very much. Okay, are there any objections?
Just slight, I mentioned a wording.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Confusion. Climate Ready Priority D says the adoption and building of resilience to climate change. And I wondered to what the adoption of what? Are we adopting resilience? I don't know. But anyway, I had a chance to email back and forth with Anna a little bit before the meeting, and she came up with a possible retitling for the Climate Ready Priority D. It could be the adoption of nature-based solutions and building of resilience to climate change.
Okay. Would the maker of the motion and the second adopt that as a friendly amendment?
Friendly amendment, thank you.
Yes.
All right. And that's, we have a revised title for Climate Ready Priority D. All right, I forgot to ask for discussion on the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, are there any objections to the motion? Seeing none, the statement has been adopted by the Climate Commission. And thank you all for working so hard on it, especially Anu and the Climate Ready Hawaii team. Are we ready to move on to our item 4? Do you guys want a 3-minute stretch break? Or
Chair?
Yes.
Did you want to take an official vote on those two motions? I mean, on the motion and the second?
I believe we did.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Zoom protocol can be a little different from you know, a in-person meeting where we take a roll call vote or we have a show of hands or so, but I didn't hear any objections at all. So I assume there were no votes. I didn't ask for abstentions, but I don't think that I heard anyone say that they were going to abstain. All right, so we're on to item 4, which is informational updates from departments and staff. So we're going to limit these to 2 to 3 minutes in the interests of conciseness. And it's going to be on priorities relating to infrastructure for each office and department. Some may have slides. So we'll be ready to share screen when you're ready. I'm going to start with Department of Transportation. Lynn, are you ready to provide a brief? Aha, there you go.
So You know, I didn't realize I was limited on time. I have a full-on PowerPoint presentation, so.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So, hold on, okay, so Hawaii is faced with multiple challenges of climate change due to our location and transportation systems being surrounded by water, as you can imagine. Anticipation and adaptation are vital to ensure a lessened impact on our facilities and operations. In 2018, we had $94 million in damages that qualified for FHWA Emergency Relief Program. These damages included were due to flooding, landslides, hurricane, earthquakes, volcanic eruption, and lava flow. By the year 2100, Hawaii is projected for a 6 feet sea level rise, which is a main concern to our coastlines. Currently, 70% of state highways are vulnerable to a stressor or hazard. Given Hawaii's limited landmass and high costs for acquiring land and construction, relocating facilities that will be inundated is cost prohibitive. With this traditional approach, costs are estimated at $30 million.
Billions.
$30 billion, sorry, $30 billion. I wish it was 30 million.
Yeah.
So in terms of Honolulu Harbor modifications, our harbor system is the main hub for importing goods into Hawaii, where 98% of goods are imported by boat, and Honolulu Harbor is a central hub of the harbor system. The main challenge to our coastal harbors face is adapting to sea level rise because there's no way for harbor facilities to retreat from the shoreline. As a solution to sea level rise, the Harbors Division is evaluating a concept of controlling the water level within the Honolulu Harbor by installing control structures such as locks and dams in the harbor entrance channels. The combination of this at the entrance of the channels will be able to keep the water level within the harbor at a desired level and allow ships to traverse between the harbor and ocean. We're currently seeking a federal feasibility study by the Army Corps of Engineers for the Honolulu Harbor modifications at an approximate cost of $3 million and will take about 3 years to complete. The state will pay for $1.5 million of the costs. The estimated cost for Honolulu Harbor modifications to adapt to sea level rise is estimated to be between $1 billion to $3 billion. For our neighbor islands, their commercial harbors are constructed in broad bays, which do not accommodate a dam structure. Therefore, we plan on replacing pile-supported piers with bulkhead piers by installing sheet piles along the pier face. The estimated cost or price is approximately $8 billion for that. The Kapalama Container Project, which is currently underway, which is part of our harbor's modernization program, will have a pier elevation of 9 feet above water. This should provide enough clearance at high tide during the projected sea level rise. In terms of Airports Division, our Airports Division is aware of the multiple potential impacts that could happen and are currently facing due to climate change. Our Airports Division has noticed effects due to high wind events, freezing rain, heavy precipitation, and lightning strikes, which have created limitations in ground and flight operations. For the future, we anticipate a potential rise in temperature and sea level and changes in precipitation and extreme weather conditions. The impact of temperature and precipitation could increase the demand for cooling of buildings and increase drainage requirements for aircraft runways. According to the accepted sea level rise format, findings show that inundation would occur at 10 of Hawaii's airports. Adaptation strategies considered for airports include construction of shoreline revetment and seawalls, elevate runway and taxiways, retrofit all facilities by reconstruction and modification to at least 1 foot above the projected sea level rise elevation over the next 100 years, and relocate the airports to higher elevations. Based on construction costs of current projects, we are currently looking at a need of approximately $8 billion to address anticipated sea level rise at our airports. Here are just a few exposure maps showing the effects of sea level rise at airport locations. And I can put a link to our study in the chat section after my presentation. The DOT Sustainable Management Plan was developed to support our airports division and its ongoing mission to incorporate the principles of sustainability in all aspects of airport operations. This includes energy, carbon, water, waste, and stormwater. The goal of SMP is to leverage design, construction, operations, and maintenance dollars through proven business. Sustainable mitigation strategies include use of renewable energy to reduce fossil fuels by 10% in 2020, reduce potable water consumption by 10%, and reduce water reclamation, reduce waste generation by 4%, and increase recycling by 4%, retrofit relevant utility services to reduce resource consumption, that is like LED lights and motion, control lights and energy saving fixtures, and develop alternative fuel efficient strategies. Highways division, based on fuel consumption alone, transportation is a large contributor to the release of carbon dioxide to the environment. HDOT's goal is to reduce fuel consumption in ground transportation by 70% by 2030. The FTA's low or no emission grant program includes $180 million for fiscal year 2021 for the purchase of or lease of low or no emission vehicles and related facilities. For fiscal year 2021, our statewide transportation planning office did receive a low or no emission bus program grant from the FTA worth $5.15 million. Through our STP office and partnering with our various counties, these funds and previously appropriated FTA grants will be used to replace aging diesel buses with 9 EV buses and battery charging infrastructure. This will improve, we believe, air quality, transit options, and further the state's renewable energy and transportation electrification goal. As you know, we entered into a statewide Hawaii fleet electrification contract. The information is provided in this slide. We completed the Highways Climate Adaptation Action Plan, which I can provide a link in the chat. And in conclusion, Hawaii is working toward building a system of resilience and adaptation to prevent heavy impacts from climate change. An investment towards infrastructure resilience could spark innovation for sea level rise, protection of coastal assets, stabilization of slopes to reduce landslides and rockfall risks, and decarbonization of construction materials. It's important to advocate for flexibility in existing programs such as transportation alternatives that encourage development of pedestrian and bicycle facilities and other small scale projects with community benefits. Sorry for the long presentation, but that's it for me. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you very much. Let's hold our questions until we've heard from other departments. Chair Case, do you want to introduce Leah Laramie from the Department of Land and Natural Resources? Suzanne, you're muted. Well, why don't go ahead? Why don't we move to Leah Laramie with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife. Go ahead, Leah.
Mahalo, Mary Alice. Again, I'm Leah Laramie. I am a natural resource planner with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife. Just wanted to give you a few highlights from what we've been doing here at the Department of Land and Natural Resources. I know a number of you are familiar with the Trillion Trees Initiative. We've been working on pledges with DLNR, obviously, Department of Defense, Department of Education, and Department of Transportation to create a statewide pledge towards the Trillion Tree Initiative, which was launched at the World Economic Forum in 2020 in support of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So it's the Trillion Trees Initiative is an organization that connects, empowers, and mobilizes the global reforestation community. So it's a conglomerate of a number of different organizations that are helping to really reach this goal of conserving, restoring, and growing 1 trillion trees globally by 2030. So we've all been working hard on identifying how to make these pledges and how we can communicate that. So if anyone's interested in learning more and how to get involved, please let me know and we can work on that. Our carbon certification for the state has been facing some legal challenges. We've got pretty far in the process up to when we had to sign the contracts. And then there was some language within their contracts that the state just couldn't sign on to. So we're looking into alternative options for that, looking at, if we can negotiate with the carbon certification agencies. But in the meantime, we're still planting trees, so no worries about that. As well as working at the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, I'm also the liaison for the U.S. Climate Alliance Natural and Working Lands team. And with that, the Hawaii research team has been working on identifying gaps in knowledge data. So we've been working on that with the Greenhouse Gas Sequestration Task Force. So some of the gaps in the knowledge data that have been identified are understanding greenhouse gas emissions and how those work specifically with Hawaii soils, because there's a lot of national data that doesn't really translate to statewide. Also looking more specifically at the greenhouse gas fluxes from pasture lands and recently converted lands, and quantifying soil nitrogen and phosphorus, relations in tropical forests and soil fluxes, as well as soil carbon sequestration. We know that the soil carbon models that are nationally listed are just not working for the state. So we are looking at different options and how to address that so that we can better estimate our soil sequestration rates with climate smart practices. And also looking at the land use classification and GIS layers. We're looking at inconsistencies within the maps and trying to ground truth that and work with communities so that we can better identify which areas have the most potential to sequester carbon, as well as which lands could be used for increasing our local food production or local forests. Another big thing, this might be a little hard to read and I apologize, is we've identified climate smart practices. So these are practices that can not only increase or reduce the emission or increase the sequestration of carbon, but also if you look at the top here, it looks at the different co-benefits of those actions. So aesthetics and recreation, air quality, cultural benefits, economic benefits, soil quality, and water quality. So looking at the relationship of carbon smart practices and how those also have multiple other benefits. So that's my little update for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leah. That's great. Let's see. We have, I have a few comments, I think, unless Justine wants to go ahead. Justine Nihipali is the program manager for our Coastal Zone Management Program in the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. Justine, did you want to say anything?
Sure. I prepared a few things based on Anu's prompt to us. So thank you, Anu. So one of the things that we've been doing at CZM is to try to better communicate some of the work that we're doing. One of the items that we've been working on is communicating the support that we provide to the county planning departments in their administration of special management permits, special management area permits and shoreline setbacks. And so we've identified some of the very proactive things that some of our counties are working on, as well as specific projects related to carrying out the coastal zone management objectives and policies, which I'll put in the chat. And so that demonstrates some of the work and the funding that our NOAA coastal management grants support here at the state level, as well as the county level. So we're grateful to be working with those partners. Also appreciate Zendo and Luke's references to building code resilience and land use planning. One of our significant 5-year strategies that NOAA has approved and funded over $850,000 has supported the implementation of identifying essential facilities that are subject to stronger building codes related to tsunami resilience. And that's not necessarily climate change related, but certainly coastal hazards, which was the focus of our 5-year strategy from the fiscal year 16 to 2020. We have focused our fiscal year 16 or 20 to 25 strategy on chronic erosion and sea level rise. One of the things that we're looking at in addressing some of the county's decision-making challenges is the parcel by parcel decision-making related to shoreline development as it is right now. And what we have been starting to scope under the state's Ocean Resources Management Plan is assessing how a regional perspective, due to Hawaii's unique geological characteristics versus a more homogeneous shoreline, such as on the mainland, what that might look like as there are more difficulties now that we have prohibited seawalls for the protection of beaches, which is wonderful, but looking at alternatives to adaptation and regional perspectives. One that's going that, you know, an example is Sam Lamo's work with the Waikiki district in renourishment, for example. So that's one example that we're looking at as well, but in comparison to other states that have some regional assessment. So I shared that in the link, and then I'm happy to share a link to one of our other story maps for the Ocean Resources Management Plan. In addition, we're continuing to support the Greenhouse Gas Sequestration Task Force, which has supported some additional work with Dr. Crow, which Leah might have discussed already, so I won't redo that conversation related to the specificity of Hawaii soil in comparison to the national models that are used on the mainland. And then because my colleague is not here today, the Sustainable 2050 Plan was also published and released earlier this year, a few weeks ago actually. So look forward to sharing that in the chat as well. And I know a lot of you on this Zoom were involved in that production and implementation to make that a very robust, inclusive process. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to add just a couple of thank yous to the legislators for Act 178, which charges the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development with working with the state agencies on reporting to the legislature, inventorying facilities that are at risk of climate change, and then reporting progress on planning for adaptations for protection of those facilities or other options to the legislature. So that, thank you legislators for that. We are working on it already. Let's see, let's move on to commission members. Are there questions on that you'd like to ask the presenters? Do I see any hands up? If not, we'll go to members of the public, and I'd like to start with.
I have sorry, Mary Alice, I was slow. This is Nicole Lowe, and sorry, my camera's off. I'm getting a slow internet message, but for DOT, just kind of tying this back to the presentation we had earlier and the portion that came from the transportation planner at DOH. What kind of work is DOT doing? I mean, you did mention it, but more specifically, and I know the state DOT versus county DOT has a little bit different role, but just to support the other modes of transportation, pedestrians and cyclists, and public transit, of course.
Thank you, Representative. Deputy Director Araki Regan, did you want to comment on that?
So besides climate change, what we're doing to address increasing the safety of pedestrians, etc. Is that your question?
Right. Well, just the big picture. It's not just about pedestrian safety, but about besides just building roads or adapting roads. Does DOT have a transportation planner that has a similar kind of focus to what we heard from CJ earlier, where you're thinking also about transit, bus systems, bikeways, bike lanes, and pedestrians?
Yes, within the highways division, we have planners, we have bicycle multimodal specialists. We have the motor vehicle safety office. We have a variety of professionals within the division who are working to address the various issues that were brought forth. We also partner with the city and county on efforts. So yes, we do. We have various programs, projects that the legislature has funded, has approved, like the red light camera project that is currently being worked on. I mean, various other efforts that I think are, I don't really have time to share, but if there's any specific information that you'd like on any efforts that we're doing, please reach out to us and I can have our highways leadership contact you directly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it might be interesting and at a future point to be able to hear from, DOT in addition to DOH about what they're doing to promote multimodal mobility and transportation options.
Thank you, Representative. Chair Case, go ahead.
Yeah, Chair, I just want to make sure that we get a chance to get all the updates from the other members of the commission. So that would be Senator Gabbard and Rep. Lowen and Rep. Tarnas and Department of Health. I think we still need to see if they have any updates.
Okay, and we'll add
and DHHL as well.
Yeah.
DHHL. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, let's start with Senator Gabbard. Go ahead, Senator.
Okay, aloha mai kako, and I hope your summer's going well. I just finished my 5th session as the AEN committee chair, and I'm stoked that we were able to pass. There's 23 ag and environment bills this session. And so with that, I'll jump right into the brief summary of the 2021 climate change legislation and then make a few comments at the end. First thing that comes to mind is SCR 44, our climate emergency resolution. And that reso was requested by Dave and Sherry Mullenix of 350.org. And as you know, it passed with flying colors. And interesting, while 1,997 jurisdictions in 34 countries, the latest count that I saw, have declared climate emergency, Hawaii became the first state in the US to do so. I thought that was really interesting. So with that reso, we made a strong statement by declaring a statewide climate emergency and requesting statewide collaboration among government, business, and community members to address the growing climate crisis. But what's really powerful is that by declaring that climate emergency, we make it clear that we're not talking about an abstract future threat, but it's a crisis that's already here. So in other words, there's no more going back to business as usual. And what's also cool is that the RESO has been getting some traction on the mainland. In fact, I've had several college students contacting my office for virtual meetings in the last week or so after hearing about the RESO. So definitely SCR 44 comes to mind as a big win from the 2021 session. Next, regarding bills, I'm very happy with HB 243, the sea level rise adaptation bill that you mentioned, Mary Alice, passing into law is Act 178. I think it's a big win, and I think Rep. Tarnas will go into more detail in his update. Also, I was pleased with Senator Keith Agaron's sea level rise disclosure bill, SB 474, signed into law as Act 179, mandating seller disclosures of real property transactions that fall within the SLR exposure area. Another big takeaway is SB 367, the beach restoration bill. Now Act 162, the DLNR Sam Lemo requested. With 70% of our beaches eroding, this was a no-brainer. Regulation's good, but there's a point where something can be too regulated. And what we were looking at was all the red tape involved. It was discouraging beach restoration and maintenance projects from individuals, community organizations, and from government agencies from doing their beach restoration projects. So what this bill does is it waives Section 401 of the Federal Clean Water Act, and it replaces it with the approval from DLNR's small-scale beach restoration program. And then regarding bills that did not pass this session, I'd definitely like to see SB 493, the Ag and Forest Carbon Incentive Program, make it to the governor's desk in 2022. I introduced this bill based on input from Leah Laramie from DLNR, and it basically incentivizes carbon sequestration activities. It sailed through the Senate, but it had a challenging referral on the House side this past session, and it stalled in the Finance Committee. So we'll be using this interim to regroup, possibly tweak, and prepare for the upcoming session. And a few thoughts going forward. So we've declared a climate emergency. Climate change is here. Now, what are we going to do about it? And obviously, it's going to take action. And one thing I definitely would like to work on for the next session is how to address climate change through nature-based solutions. And also, one of the things that stood out to me when I was reading the Commission's working paper is that 41% of Hawaii's ag lands are currently unfarmed. 41%. So I've been involved with ag and environment for many years, and you've heard it and seen it so many times. 85 to 90% of our food we import at $3 billion a year. It's just ridiculously absurd. So finally, I want to mention a popular Hawaiian saying, "Oke kahua mamua, mahope ke hukulu." And that translates to the foundation first, then the building. And I think our Climate Commission is building momentum. I truly do. I think the foundation is being laid. If we can keep the momentum and build upon that momentum, continuing to stack those bricks one on top of the other, I think we can build a really great thing with regard to forming a climate-ready Hawaii. And what I've always admired about the Commission is that we have all the key players, right, across the board together, collaborating and how we can best serve our state, our people, and as well as our Aina and the waters as well. So the Commission is the glue that holds everything together. And I think the Commission's doing a great job. Mahalo to co-chairs Case and Evans, and of course, Anu and the entire team for your continued hard work and commitment. I also want to say mahalo to the other commissioners for all that you are doing in helping our Hawai'i. I think climate change is affecting the entire planet, obviously, and it's going to take Laulima, many hands working together to do what's pono and taking care of Hawai'i. So mahalo and aloha.
Thank you, Senator Gabbard. Representative Lowen, did you want to say a few words?
Sure, thank you. I'll keep it really brief because I think we've shared a lot of this information before, and it's also gotten a lot of other coverage. But if anyone hasn't heard from my committee this year, one of our priorities was really trying to take some steps forward on ground transportation. And, we did focus primarily on transitioning state fleets to light duty vehicles in the state's fleets to electric vehicles. So by 2030 for passenger vehicles and 2035 for other light duty vehicles, that will be like a kind of natural turnover process as cars are replaced. And then we also passed another bill that provides a sustainable source of funding for the EV charging station rebate program. And it's actually also, it will be a significantly increased amount. It shifts 3 cents of the existing barrel tax to this program. And so I think that'll be an opportunity when we come back in future years to think about how we can expand that program and provide the state support to building out EV infrastructure so that purchasing an EV and transitioning to EVs will be a choice for more people in the state of Hawaii, not just government, but private sector as well. Of course, we passed the
resurrection stone.
What is going on?
Somebody's got their hot mic running.
We also passed the climate emergency resolution that Senator Gabbard mentioned, and the sea level rise bills that I think Rep. Tarnas will talk about. I thought I'd also mention we passed a resolution that I introduced, although I think it was a Senate version that passed, related to reef insurance. So this is another nature-based solutions for providing coastal protection. And so that hasn't gotten as much attention. That was basically urging DLNR to look into it further. And I think we'll come back and continue to work on that next year. And other things going forward next year for my committee, I think energy efficiency continues to be really important. We're continuing to look at, especially for Oahu, this transition off of the AES coal plant and that transition. So there's been a lot of focus on getting large utility scale projects up and running in time. But I think we also have to remember the demand side and the efficiency and distributed generation side. And there could be more of a role for the legislature in that. Other issues that have continued to circulate, I think will still be under discussion. For example, what is the place for a carbon tax or carbon pricing in Hawaii? I think that still needs to continue to be considered. Continuing to push on the transportation transition. And, when you look at the decarbonization broadly, like over 85% of it is in the energy sector and transportation. And I think our focus ends up on ground transportation right now, largely because there are available solutions. Of course, we have to also look at aviation and shipping going forward. So, we'll keep working on those things. And thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Tarnas, did you have an update for us?
Very briefly, yes. Thank you very much, Co-Chair Evans and Co-Chair Case, for the encouragement that we report on what we're doing. I do want to emphasize the 2 bills that were the Climate Change Commission priorities. We were able to move through the House and Senate, and I thank my colleagues in both the House and the Senate for their support. So that we ended up moving out HB 243, which was discussed earlier, where all the executive agencies need to compile what we've heard today, which are, what are the at-risk critical infrastructure, from sea level rise, and what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to prioritize going forward, what our limited funding will be applied to. So that sort of is a real important recognition that sea level rise is real and we have to plan for it. The other bill that was already previously mentioned, I just want to highlight SB 474, something that the commission really wanted to get through. And I want to thank the realtors because they were working with us to make sure that the realtors could use the sea level rise viewer. And thanks to PAC-IOS and others who are putting that together so that it's user friendly. And I want to acknowledge that it really was, it was a Senate bill that we moved out, but it was something that we've been working on both in the House and Senate for many years. And thanks to Rep. Lowen for her work on this previously. And let me mention just 1 or 2 other bills, and this is in the category of modifying administration to align ourselves more carefully and more accurately with our goals. How we incorporate sustainability into our land use decision making is very, very important. So we did that by actually consolidating the Land Use Commission within the Office of Planning and renaming it the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. Now that's OPSD is where the Sustainability Coordinator resides. And so it's very important that we have this kind of integration there. The other bill that Rep. Lowen advocated for, and we were able to get through, move the Office of Environmental Quality Control over to the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development as well. So this is just one step forward in trying to change our administrative structure so that it more closely aligns with our goals. I can't miss the opportunity to highlight Chair Case's favorite bill, HB 1020, which he's actually said was our most important bill that we passed. And I acknowledge that it really is cutting edge. Adaptive management is something that every resource management expert around the world really advocates for. How do we adapt to rapidly changing conditions, whether they're natural conditions like a coral spawning or a coral bleaching event or a storm, or overuse by just a huge number of people coming in. We sometimes need to modify our regulatory framework, and sometimes it's too slow to go through the rulemaking process, which can take 6, 12 months, or a long time. So by having decisions made at publicly noticed land board meetings that have public participation and review and comment on all of these decisions, we felt at the legislature was sufficient. So we gave DLNR this adaptive management authority to move through measures to change rules more quickly so that we can adapt more effectively. It was a busy session. We got lots done, but those are just a few highlights. So I'll end it there and hand it back to you, Co-Chair Evans.
Chair Evans, I just wanted to, in my supporting role as the silent co-chair of this meeting, I asked Anu to put a CC Climate Commissioner before the names so that we can make sure that the commissioners all get a chance to give their updates and you have a chance to track it. So, because I know HIEMA wants to, and DHHL, and maybe the counties and the other agencies. So just to make it.
Yes, that does help. Thank you very much. Department of Health, Marianne Rossio, do you want to go next? Then what? And we'll work our way through the commission members. Marianne, are you available to? Yep, there you go.
Sure. Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. So I wanted to provide a couple of brief updates on work that the Department of Health, Clean Air Branch, and Hazard Evaluation and Emergency Response Office are doing. So first, I wanted to mention the Clean Air Branch posted a request for proposals for the next statewide greenhouse gas emissions inventory contract last week, Friday. So in this multi-year contract, they're asking for development of new greenhouse gas emissions inventories for 2005 to support efforts to align with the Paris Agreement, 2018 through 2022, projections through 2045, and updates to the previous year inventories. All proposals are due 4 p.m. on September 2nd. And we wanted to thank everyone who participated in providing input in the drafting of this RFP. And we're excited to have it posted, and we're looking forward to receiving the proposals to get this work going. I also wanted to let everyone know about some really significant work that Dr. Diana Felton and the Hazard Evaluation and Emergency Response, or HERE office, is doing in regards to risk of sea level rise and increased flooding on known chemical contamination sites in Hawaii. And I did have just a few slides. I wasn't sure, should I share it or are you?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, let me see. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay, so just a quick background. So the HERE office manages over 1,000 chemical contamination sites statewide. Historical, industrial, and agricultural uses and releases have generally resulted in the contamination of these sites. The contamination at these sites have often been managed in place for protection of human health and the environment. However, the effects of climate change and rising sea level will disrupt these stable contamination sites, creating new hazards. So movement of the contaminants and changing chemical conditions, creating more exposure and higher toxicity are of the biggest concern. So this slide shows one of the most important industrial areas in the state, with the entrance to Pearl Harbor, Honolulu International Airport, and the Honolulu Harbor. All of the green dots are known chemical contaminated sites within this area. It's a lot, yeah. The concern is what is going to happen at all of these sites when they're affected by the sea level rise effects, such as submersion from the sea rising, groundwater inundation, increased flooding from more intense storms on top of higher water and coastal erosion. So this slide shows a closer view of the Honolulu Harbor. And the yellow areas are properties with chemical contamination, with the centroids of the contamination shown as the white dots. The blue shading shows areas within the 3.2 feet sea level rise zone, and the purple shading on the right-hand picture shows the area impacted by a 1% annual flood risk with the 3.2 feet sea level rise. So you can see all of these contaminated areas that could be affected. This slide shows another example showing contaminant movement at Waianae High School, with the white dot in the upper left showing the centroid of a contamination for an area that was used for air riflery practice for many years and has high levels of lead in the soil. So this area is less than 3 feet above sea level, and you can see it's very close to the ocean. Again, the blue shading shows the areas impacted by 3.2 feet of sea level rise, and the purple shading on the right shows the 1% annual flood risk with 3.2 feet of sea level rise. So you can see where the lead contamination could get transferred within the school and to the surrounding residential and other neighboring areas. And then this last slide shows that there are 300 contaminated sites on Oahu within the 3.2 feet sea level rise zone. And this problem is not limited to Oahu, as there are contaminated sites within this zone, also on Hawaii, Kauai, Maui, Molokai, and Ipilanai. If you were to consider the annual 1% annual flood risk, these numbers would be even greater. So I've shared some of the information included in this report by Dr. Felton and the HERE office. The entire report can be viewed on the website below and also on the climate change portal. Reading this report was very eye-opening to me, and I highly encourage you to take a look at it. This effort is ongoing as they work with various agencies and organizations and look more closely with site-specific evaluations of high-risk sites. Addressing this issue requires study and planning to understand and mitigate these hazards before they cause adverse health effects to the public and damage to the environment and economy. Dr. Felton and her team are open to any thoughts, ideas, suggestions that you may have and would like to hear from you. Her contact information is shown also on this slide. And she's also here today with us. We're fortunate to have her. So she's here for any questions on this work that they're doing and the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. We'll hold questions until we've heard from all of the members. I think my next note is Nancy McPherson from Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Hi, aloha, commissioners. We don't have a PowerPoint, but I am just going to highlight the initiatives regarding infrastructure that we're working on right now. Besides our kind of high-level policy initiative to update our general plan, which is going to include climate change adaptation, dealing with sea level rise, and community resilience. We're looking at broadband service expansion. So we've worked hard to get some opportunities from the federal government and FCC license, that sort of thing. So we're hoping to be expanding broadband on Hawaiian homelands. We also have several renewable energy solar PV initiatives, working on the siting of community-based renewable energy projects on Hawaiian homelands, as well as a solar array at Kalailoa. We're continuing to work on strengthening the resilience of our DHHL-owned water systems on Molokai, Kauai, and Hawaii Islands with federal assistance. And we're also initiating conversations on cesspool conversions with, we've been talking to the congressional delegation, the Water Resources Research folks, and looking at potential federal funding and or grants. We have a high number of cesspools on Hawaiian homelands that are going to need to be remedied. And so we're looking at developing some strategies and funding sources for doing that. So I've also placed in the chat right after I get out of this meeting, I'm doing an update to the Hawaiian Homes Commission on our activities. And so I provide, I have a backslash there, ignore the backslash. I have a submittal in with the commission today. And so you can find out more about our activities in that submittal. And thanks for all the updates on the legislation. I was digging around everywhere and looking for, I was trying to do an update on the last, 2 years of legislation. There's been so much activity. So it's been a huge improvement from 2019 when we were all kind of a little depressed. And so thanks for everyone's super hard work in getting those bills passed. So mahalo.
Thank you, Nancy. Who wants to go next of the commissioners? Luke, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I will try to share my screen here. This works. So I'm just going to give a brief update from the emergency management kind of view. There's been a lot of conversation about the BRIC program, and I'll go into that in some mitigation updates. Let's see if I can control my slide here. So the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities program, it's a FEMA program, the fiscal year $20. There's been a lot of interest from elected officials to you, many partners on this call of how to get access to the BRIC program. One of the challenges, and we start talking large climate projects and large competitive amounts of money, is how competitive it is nationally. And some of the conversations we have had here today kind of run into this. So we get about $600,000 in set aside for each state. So we submitted 3 projects for that, which we were successful in. And there's about 440 plus million nationally competitive, up to $50 million per applicant. Then we submitted 13 projects on behalf of partners here in the state. All 3 of our state set-aside projects were funded. You're going to see a lot of projects on the screen here. We can provide more details. They're just more talking points I'm not going to dive into, but it shows you when we start talking about resiliency and mitigation and climate, there's a lot of nexus on certain types of projects. So you'll see the city and county, Kaimiki Middle School, a grid project, resilient power, another emergency power master plan, and then a scoping for sea level rise. So we're able to leverage some of that state set aside for that. Projects not funded, this is where we go competitive. We submitted about $120 million. You see some large scale projects here, including some microgrids, some wind retrofit, some resiliency hubs, safe rooms, things of that nature, building code updates, generators, pump stations, erosion mitigation. So a lot of different infrastructure plays from our partners that either are part of the state hazard mitigation plan or the county hazard mitigation plans. Some lessons learned, and then this kind of gets into that conversation about momentum. On the right over here, you can see a number of buckets of points. Every application lost 15 points because they do not participate in the federally accredited building code effectiveness grading schedule. I was surprised coming from the Pacific Northwest. This is kind of a tried and true for a lot of the municipalities to participate. We don't participate here. So when we start to look at, what we're investing in some of those kind of foundational tools, this is one to have a larger conversation at, because it puts us, at least in some of the FEMA programs, at a much lower level by not participating. There are also some other lessons learned that when we were competing, $440 or so million sounds like a lot. Only 10 states were awarded projects. They were all large scale, a lot of flood control infrastructure, which we've heard a lot here today. When we start competing nationally, out of the 900 projects submitted, FEMA was only providing feedback on the first 105 applications. None of ours made it above that level. So there's a lot of conversation with FEMA Region 9 on ways that we can learn from best practices out there. The other big challenges when you talk about these projects is cost share. So whether that's legislative support or agency support or other types of in-kind match, the larger these infrastructure projects are, the more funding that we have to have. One option is to potentially look at block grant funding that goes directly to the counties as match, since it loses federal identity. The other federal programs can't be used necessarily to match these dollars. Some other hazard mitigation highlights as we look at projects that are out there. In a similar vein, we have submitted a number of these projects through the community project funding request, most recently through Schatz's office and Case's office. You'll see the Hawaii Safe Home Retrofit Program, which has a mix against a number of the climatic hazards. Office Energy has a couple of microgrids projects. On the Schatz side, you'll see a number of master plan drainage and flood projects. Flood infrastructure is driving a lot of these conversations. So we also have a number of open disasters where mitigation is funded, and we start talking about wanting to solve problems fast. The challenge and what we see from the emergency management side, which you all know, these projects takes a long time. Over here on the left, 4282 is from 2016 severe weather, flooding, and landslides. You can see some of the projects that have been in the works that we're working on. Not a large amount of money, but working with the Board of Water Supply, some stream gauges, and again, some generator projects. 2018 was a banner year for disasters around here, and we've gotten some of the mitigation dollars out the door. 4365 was our April flooding, where we dropped 50 inches of rain on Kauai and 25 here on Oahu. But you'll see some generator projects. One of the nice things about the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is that we can go all hazard. And again, you'll see the code update, which is an area that we have to make some progress in this state. And then the last two areas that we've been focused on is 4366, which was the volcanic eruption on the Big Island. We've got about $4.1 million right now. These mitigation dollars are tied to recovery dollars. We estimate once the big recovery projects go through that this will probably be north of 20 to 25 million. But you'll see some shoreline riparian setbacks and some integration of climate change into hazard mitigation plans. And then lastly, Hurricane Lane was the most recent post-disaster mitigation funds that we have stood up, looking at some critical infrastructure assessments and some Oahu resiliency action plans. The last thing I'll just kind of mention, I'm like a pig in the mud in these conversations because there's so much overlap, not only from a mitigation recovery side, but from a consequence side with the climatic view of the world. We do have a state hazard mitigation plan. It's FEMA approved. There's a big chunk of it on vulnerable infrastructure from the hazards, including climate change. That was approved in 2018 by the governor. The next update is due in 2023. So we started the initial scoping. We're going to be trying to hire a mitigation strategist that will be in our resiliency branch to work on. That's the update for today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Luke. That was a lot of information. So who would like to go next? Wave or just speak out? Are there any more commissioners that would like to make updates? Who haven't we? Zendo, do you want to go
Sure.
ahead?
Please, thank you, Co-Chair Evans. I will make a quick update. No PowerPoint, but some good updates. So currently we have gone under a vehicle fleet analysis with the help of CADMIS, where the Department of Research and Development has began its fleet analysis, basically to bring Hawaii County to zero emissions by 2035. So going through everything in that way. We have CIP money allocated for energy efficiency for some of our facilities, zero emissions infrastructure for mass transit. Our planning department, we're looking for our open space network. Department of Water Supply, where I previously sit on the board there, has been deploying, the Department of Water Supply has been doing a lot of energy efficiency work, and they currently have deployed over 200 leak detection loggers to find out where the leaks are. And that's also with the help of Energy Hawaii, has been a very good partner for Department of Water Supply. That's been really a great program. We have the county's currently working on the Integrated Climate Action Plan with the technical support of ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. This is a collaboration between Research and Development and Planning Department, so we're really excited about this. Got to give all special thanks out to the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. Justine, we really appreciate you guys' support for our setback projects and all of our CZM work. So we are working with help from the state CZM and Federal Hazard Mitigation grant. We've initiated a project to update our shoreline setbacks and riparian buffers. So we have 3 phases to that, site-specific research, and ultimately coming out to new rules and codes around that. Our general plan, which is behind on this update, we are re-looking at it from this administration's perspective and really working on bringing it up to climate readiness. This plan is going to be a 2040 plan. And so we kind of took a pause on it to really make sure that we're ready for what's happening, or at least the plan being dynamic as it needs to be for the uncertainties that we have. With that, we also, the county council allocated some money for a code update for zoning code and subdivision code. So I think that also very much encompasses this entire conversation. Another area that I think this is probably about 10 years behind, but come July 26th, so next Monday, we are standing up the County of Hawaii EPIC system, which is the Electronic Processing and Information Center. So the Planning Department and Department of Public Works will be going completely paperless on accepting applications. So we will, if you have a building permit or a land use application, it will be only accepted on a digital format. We have lots of areas to help people out that are going through the changes through standing this up. We're seeing a lot of concerns around behavior. And I think through the general climate change, as has been said many times through this meeting, behavior changes, and some things seem very, very challenges, but as we go through and make those changes, we can see that there's a completely new way. So that's something that's really exciting. So people no longer have to submit, 20 copies of everything, 400 pages or 2,000 copies of this or that. So I feel like that was about 10 years behind, but we've made a really concerted effort to stand this up. A couple things that are off subject, or excuse me, not county related, but within our county, planning department's been working on expediting anything renewable. So the AES solar system in Waikoloa solar and storage project has broken ground. It's a 30 megawatt solar voltaic with 120 megawatt hours of containerized lithium ion batteries. So there is actual all the racking systems on the ground. You could drive through Waikoloa. It's actually happening. It's really, really neat to see that. And got the opportunity to take a tour. Many of you may know about this already, but Terraformation, which is a company on the west side of the island that's working, it actually has the world's largest off-grid desalination plant. And what they're doing is they can do 34,000 gallons of water a day. And what they're doing is they're utilizing this technology to be able to reforest areas that would otherwise not be reforestable because they're essentially deserts. And so they're working on that right now, which goes to the Trillion Tree Project, because out of those calculations, based on my understanding, we need about 3 billion acres of land to make that. And a lot of that land isn't suitable right off the bat for growing trees. So this technology that they're modeling out there, I think is a really great step in the right direction to bring those resources, water, to areas that would really need it to keep the trees going. So with any of this, I think it's a a lot of various things will create the results that we need. And for those who probably haven't read it yet, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster is a really great book by Bill Gates that gives some good general information that we're utilizing over here as well. That's my brief update. Thank you all very much, and really happy to be a part of this commission. Just to say, this is very, very close to my heart. I used to specialize in green building way back in the early 2000s. I feel like we've gone through a phase where it wasn't popular to be off-grid and organic, then it got very popular, and now we're at a place we need to have this done 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So as everyone's saying, keeping that momentum going. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Zendo Kern. Jody, did you want to give an update for Kauai County? Kaina, go ahead.
Alice, sorry, I was able to jump back on. I'll give a real brief one. I know it's been a long day for everybody. Just for Kauai briefly, we're pleased to announce that Friday, we issued our notice to proceed with our consultant. We are embarking on our climate adaptation plan. So we start pretty much today. A lot of it concerning GHG reduction. So much of Kauai is actually already renewable. Our energy source right now is around 60%, 65%. We've got a pretty massive project out on the west side, which is going to be a solar system that takes irrigated water coming down from Kokee and shoots it back up on a cyclical system, which is almost like, I think that's going to put us close to 75 or 80% once that project's complete. So a lot of, as it pertains to GHG reduction, was actually focusing on VMT reduction for our island in that resiliency plan and different approaches. So I really appreciated CJ's presentation earlier in the meeting because I think while all of us can kind of agree on GHG reduction being good in and of itself, but not everybody kind of marches to that necessarily beat. So being able to frame it in different formats and different approaches, which CJ definitely did, is very useful and powerful, we believe. In addition to the resiliency plan that we're embarking on, we have a contract with Chip Fletcher folks to expand our special management area lines. We hope to have that proposed map change in the next 3 or 4 months here up at our planning commission, and just to align the special management area with the sea level rise exposure area. I think I've talked about that at a few meetings before, but we're hoping we're getting closer to the finish line with that. And then we also, right now, from a planning perspective, as many of you know, we adopted the Special Treatment Coastal Edge District this past year, which is a specific zoning overlay for properties that are in the Slerexa coastal area that are most immediate or adjacent to the coastline. So we actually have a contract with SSFM to further assess and essentially provide a design standard guidebook for construction and mitigation in the sea level rise exposure area, which, you know, within the erosion rate data line, the mitigation is to move out of there, right? But there's a lot of questions with passive flooding and high wave run-up. What are possible approaches to construction in those areas, and getting specific design standards for it that we hope to be able to, one, either look at adopting at a administrative rule standpoint, or working with Mary Alice and Justine folks and our other county partners and looking at possible uniform approaches to design standards for the Slerexa. Because while we think it would be good, being that we have this data, it'd be good to look at specific design standards for Kauai. We also recognize that it would be, you know, somewhat ill-advised or ill-informed of us to try to adapt it just for one island as opposed to having a statewide approach. So we're just going to see what type of product we get and then begin those discussions. And that's kind of where we are in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Hall. Jeff, are you going to report for Maui?
Sure, thank you. Want to follow up Zendo and saying his paperless process, we're doing the same rollout actually with 6 county departments at the first week of October. So that will create some change management behavior issues. We're looking forward to lots and lots of questions as we change our permitting system. But anyway, You've been hearing from me for years, and I'm probably getting tired of it, about our shoreline setbacks, and we're hoping to get it to our planning commission this summer. Not quite sure that's going to happen. Director McLean would love to have been able to bring that to the Hawaii Congress of Planning Officials as the Maui contribution in the fall. Not sure we're going to get there, but we have also, bless their hearts, we have a pre-adoption stress test now going on from attorneys with Starn, O'Toole, Marcus and Fisher, and Cades and Schutte. And Justine's part of a call with us on that on Wednesday. So seriously, it's good to have a stress test before adoption from high level attorneys. So we actually really appreciate that in a kind of a strange way. We've had a resilience hui that's been informal meetings of broad interdepartmental departmental staff in the county for years. It's been pretty quiet during COVID, but we're going to start that up next week. But in the last year, there have been a few things that I want to report. Our council passed a resolution affirming the County of Maui's commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, declared a climate emergency resolution, established a climate action and resiliency committee, and passed a bill banning plastic disposable foodware by next January. And the Mayor Victorino's administration has also created a climate action, sustainability, resiliency division in the mayor's office, and they're working on a climate action resiliency plan. We're in an RFP process in May. I'm not sure of the update on that, but I expect I'll hear that next week. So the county's launching that. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. So working on counties, Harrison, did you want to provide an update for the city and county of Honolulu now, or wait till you're?
I think, Mary Alice, I have 2 or 3 slides at the end of my presentation about everything that we're doing, or most of what we're doing in the county. So let's defer to that.
Great. So I'm looking at the members. CEO Sylvia Hussey, do you have anything you'd like to share with the members?
I don't. Thank you, Chair. I'm just supportive of all of the great work that's occurring at the county and community level, and want to add OHA's support for that work and however we can do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Have I missed anybody of the members? Phyllis, are you going to do something in addition to your comments earlier on the statement?
Yeah, just an update on from the department side regarding production of local food and protection of ecosystems. Yeah. The department is working on a project, and it is an aquaculture restoration introduction project. And what we're looking at is to focus on creating some kind of introduction of restorative aquaculture for our current stakeholders and possibly new farmers that acknowledges what exists in the field, but also see if there's a way that we can incorporate remediating water quality. So for shellfish, finfish farmers, first-time aquaculture farmers, seaweed farming, we were trying to see if there's a framework where we can get them to diversify and to look into mitigating coastal ecosystems. So that's something that we're looking at. You know, if we can carefully design something, then our current shellfish and seaweed farms could also be part of an effective strategy to help accelerate coastal restoration alongside traditional efforts to rebuild reefs. So that's all I have to share.
Are there any other members that I've missed that would like to share something? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we're still on item 4, are there comments from the public? You know, in light of the fact that we're getting close to the end of our meeting, I'd like to have you limit your comments to 1 minute. Do we see any members of the public who'd like to share a comment? Okay, I don't. Are there any questions at this point, since we deferred all the questions to the end of the presentations? Anu, do you see anybody with their hand up, or? Okay.
I do not.
All right. Let's go ahead and move to item 5. And this is an informational presentation on climate change adaptation work by Harrison Rue. And I want to tell you that I was very impressed with a version of this that I saw earlier. And I'm very grateful for Harrison for providing this for us. So go ahead, Harrison.
I'm going to share a screen in just 1 second here. Are we live? You can see it now?
Yep, we can see it.
Is it showing full screen or?
It's showing your slides down the left-hand column and all.
Okay, let's try this. We go?
Full screen.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do this lightning fast just to give you a feel for what's in the document. We've been looking at a lot of PowerPoints, so look at some of the research we did, some of the design principles. You know, the project purpose. I think folks are familiar with the resilience strategy, the OLA resilience strategy. It called for setting up design guidelines, and we've had several other efforts underway at the city that included some climate designs in them, but we've kind of found the need to come up with something that was really specific for the urban areas. First, we did some climate adaptation background research. We had both I want to actually thank Kaina for mentioning having SSM work. They were our prime on this, and they did a great job, but they also had ARUP for some international research. We really focused in the research on best practices for stormwater management, sea level rise, and flood protection, those transitions between the buildings and the streets, and mitigation for extreme heat. We then took the research and created the document we're going to talk about today. It's both for city agencies, updating policies and regs, focused on the urban areas. So TOD, but you know, the whole general urban area, not the 80 or 90% of the rest of the coastline. Includes approaches to consider in designing building sites and structure more at the site and block level. I should say, we started out kind of calling this design guidelines, and then we realized at the end of the period that we don't quite know enough what we need to require to call them guidelines yet. So that's one of the next steps. We looked, our consultants looked, everything internationally, researched, 20, 30, 40 sites, came up with lots of great links. The links are at the end of the research document, so I encourage you, these are really some really interesting studies nationally, internationally. We settled on really 4, Singapore, Hamburg, and pulled in interesting things from each one of them, New York and Boston. And some of those details are in the research document. There's some nice PowerPoints. But we also noticed that every one of those cities has what they call living documents. They're kind of publishing them online. So it's not just a static PDF. They're updating them as they learn more. So you'll see if you go on our website, you can download the PDF. But coming up in about a month, we'll have this on our live website that we can update a little more frequently. So focuses on these 4 principles: understanding the hazards, managing stormwater, designing for flooding and sea level rise, and mitigating heat. Quickly, I think a lot of you are familiar with the hazards. We point to the Climate Ready Oahu Web Explorer, which takes data from the state's SLR viewer and NOAA's SLR viewer. And it's really fairly easy to use. If any of you are not using this yet, even non-GIS geeks can just go online and click any of these areas and see how your site falls into that area. And it got tremendous amount of data available. If you're not used to using that, I'd encourage you to. One of the purposes of putting in this document is for developers or neighborhood activists that we want to introduce them to the site. So thank you, those of you who are funding that science. In terms of managing stormwater, we look at the stormwater management, the key concern in the site design. And there's lots of strategies in there at the building level. There's just a few of them in here, from anywhere from what we call green infrastructure to rooftop gardens. I should mention the city is exploring the formation of a stormwater utility that would be more fee-based, like our current water and sewer system. If you've noticed, water and sewer, they can do 20-year capital programs because they've got a stable set of fees. It's not dependent on property taxes. As we start addressing sea level rise, we don't have that stable, budgetable, fee-based system for our stormwater, which would include the climate adaptation action. So city's still working on that as an approach. There's lots of other guides. So the city stormwater best management practices guide recently updated. In terms of, this is, I think, the one that everybody's most concerned, designing for flooding and sea level rise. And we mentioned flooding because a lot of our climate issues are going to be more riverine flooding from our canals with increased rain coming off the mountains, Mauka. And so we looked at not just sea level rise, but also some of the climate adaptation along our canals. There's an introduction to folks about what design and base flood elevations are. We're also learning what this means. Some mentions of the existing and new International Building Code, which the new code requires new construction to be designed with 1 foot of freeboard above that base elevation. We mentioned, in there, and some pick examples of several flood retention features. I think a lot of folks are familiar with this pick of Tanner Springs Park in Portland, which is a great new park that also serves as a flooding retention area. Also look at some things like rainwater harvesting for reuse in agriculture and for gray water. And there's updates to the plumbing code underway. In terms of mitigating extreme heat, and I have to say, we wrote this doc before the recent Northwest, I guess 115, 120 degree, extremes that we've had recently. Even here in Hawaii, we're concerned about the need for both building shading and tree canopy, because we're not sure even if the trades are going to change a little bit with climate change. So that's still an unknown. We have a mayor's directive on street trees, and in TOD world, we're developing, we're almost about 80, 90% done with street tree plans for all the TOD areas. I'm going to go now to the meat of I think the what's new and different is these 3 building types for resilient building site design. We only picked 3 kinds of buildings, mostly for scope. We think there's probably 4 to 6 kinds of buildings, but we picked 3 because that's all we could draw for. But it really looks at how we want to adjust this, what we're calling the new resilient street-safe transition zone between existing street curb and future building height. Includes amenities, includes some slopes. We saw several examples. This is near Salt and Kaka'ako, that is already looking at planting the trees up on the upper level. I think it's really a matter of degree. This is built to just current flood level. There might be several feet difference in this transition zone to address sea level rise, but the idea is build the sidewalk up where it needs to be and the building where it needs to be, and then have it set up so that you can fill in the street and the utilities later. These are some more examples from Kaka'ako and from Waikiki. So there's three types. The tower on the podium is kind of the most common one. We show diagrams that look at both the building itself, you know, elevating equipment, planting green roofs, things like that, incorporating, you know, heat mitigation around the building, but mostly focusing on this resilient streetscape transition zone. If you look at the details in the drawing, you can see that we're recommending elevating future utilities, especially stormwater, you know, under the sidewalks and under the building so that they're not out at too low a level in the existing streetscape. We also looked at the mid-rise building, you know, 4 to 7 story buildings that are getting built a lot. Systems for on-site water reuse, or, excuse me, let me go back. On-site water reuse, sustainable roof systems. Almost every one of these things that are shown as different features in the 3 different building types could be used on one of the others. We just couldn't pack them all into one drawing. But looking at that streetscape again, the idea of a transition zone, places to get people up. We're currently doing 3 or 4 new diagrams of different ways to slice and dice how and where you change the elevation. Most of these diagrams show almost a full block long, and so you're ramping up at either end or maybe one mid-block crossing. We're showing some new diagrams of what you would do if you just are building, say, one 100-foot or 75-foot long building, how you transition and ramp it up. And then we included something for a low-rise walk-up. There's lots of these still being built around the island. Included some things here. There's potential for wet-proofing existing basements and elevating the building a little bit more. So I won't go through all the details. They're well diagrammed in the document itself, but I wanted to show one more thing about the Kapalama Canal Catalytic Project. We've been working on this for a few years. We just got the final EIS accepted and published. 3 blocks along, and I should mention, Mary Alice, you know this, but there's lots of state land along here as well, in addition to Kamehameha Schools land. But we've diagrammed how you could build the edge of the canal up for now, and then looking over on the left, the buildings could be elevated and then eventually fill in the street. And we also diagrammed here a little more detailed. We had somebody look at how you would do either sheet pilings or a concrete edge. And if you look, my cursor shows right here, there's a little notch in that diagram of the wall just to indicate that we would like the construction to be adaptable so that you could add 3 foot more. If we elevate this to an expectation of 3.2 feet, we want the wall itself to be raisable in future. And then, we did look at some diagrams of and some costing for that retaining wall as well. Very similar to what Lynn was talking about for along the harbor edge, and Kapalama Canal does feed into the harbor. So those plans along the harbor and Kalihi and Kapalama area need to be integrated. We've mentioned that to the folks doing the harbor master plan. I want to highlight, this is, Mary Alice, this is from your state TOD planning implementation from Oahu report. Your team, we fortunately kind of hired the same subcontractor, Arup, for both our project and your project. And we work with your staff to have them focus on the building and block level in our report, and then on the neighborhood level in your report. And so the thinking is kind of integrated in this, but this is from your Appendix I, the flexible adaptation pathways, showing how you might have an integrated design. Kapalama Canal is in the middle there. And, ours wouldn't really work unless you're also taking the same approach along the harbor and along Kalihi. Going to the next steps, the purpose of the document is not to require anything yet, but help designers and developers to start thinking about including these concepts in their buildings before they're required by code, to get everybody kind of on the same talking points. I should mention, they're not quite comic books, they're about 20 pages long, so they're a pretty quick read with lots of pics. We want people to start considering the adaptation solutions in their project planning. It's also serving internally among about 10 or 15 city departments to help us identify conflicts and updates needed to city policies across the different departments. This is a quick list. This isn't even everything we're doing, but the different departments that are working on some kind of ordinance or regulation associated with these sort of longer range plans. We've identified the need for that continued interagency cross-sector coordination around climate. I do want to mention, Kaina, I like your idea of having plans kind of statewide, so builders building on the different islands are kind of following the same guidelines. We're glad to work with you guys on that. It's based on our island-wide adaptation strategy, but we need more focused studies down at the site-specific or neighborhood level, engineering and feasibility studies to figure out actually how this works and how what you do on one site will affect the utilities and drainage on the nearby sites. Our land use zoning, flood zones, and hazard areas need updating. Regulations and guidance are needed for providing retention and detention to accommodate that increased rainfall and flooding. And then the requirements for trees, landscaping, and transition zones need to be detailed. Plenty more. We are working on all these, but these are all works in progress. There's 3 or 4 key things that are underway at the city. The climate resilience design guidelines, the next step in this. Department of Design and Construction and CCSR are working at the first steps of design guidelines. It's not fully funded, but they're working on the first stage of it. LUPD is working on updates to the special management area and the shoreline setback regs. We're working to integrate climate guidance and language into the TOD plans and zoning. Facilities maintenance just work with all city departments to create new Department of Public Works standard details in stormwater utility, and they have some placeholders in there for more detailed design guidance on climate once we work out some of these more detailed strategies. And then these are several that are kind of underway more for awareness and coordination. I mentioned already the climatereadyoahu.org. We have the primary urban center development plan underway that's incorporating a lot of climate activities. There's just underway the North Shore Sustainable Communities Plan update. And if you're interested in any of these, they're available online. We have a One Water planning group set up by a recent ordinance. It's multi-department that's meeting monthly to address these issues. We're working with CCSR to apply for some of those FEMA hazard mitigation and those new BRIP grants. Flood ordinance and building code updates underway. 2 last slides. So I want to encourage everybody to go to climatereadyoahu.org, participate. We're so pleased and proud in purple. Those are the list of people actually getting out in the field and meeting with the community again, vaccinated and masked, but they're going to farmers markets and things like that. The next one is in Mililani on Sunday. So encourage you to drop in any one of these on the neighborhood or go online, climatereadyoahu.org, and weigh in. And then the primary urban center development plan update, there's going to be a draft published in the fall that addresses many of these. You can go online and weigh in at pucdp.com. And then we encourage you to weigh into that. And I did mention the North Shore. I don't have a separate slide about that, but that's just the initial input. There's a survey online for that as well. So that's all we got. I should mention at honolulu.gov TOD, we've been, since there's been a little bit of a slow period for the last year and a half, we've been working on our website. We're getting ready in about a month to unveil brand new website, much better organized versions of all the existing material, plus a lot of new stuff. And so watch for that sometime in August, and you can download the doc there right now at this stage. Thanks, Mary Alice. I'll stop share.
Okay, Harrison, that's amazing how much you guys have been doing. And I think that speaks to an area that we haven't had as much emphasis on, which is how to adapt to climate change in urban areas. So I'm going to suggest that we not do comments and questions at this point and move on to our coordinators update. Anu, because we are getting a little bit close to our adjournment time. So if there's anything burning, wave wildly now, but if not, yes, Anu, I did see the text, thank you. And we'll go on to your presentation. Go ahead, Anu.
Thank you, co-chair. I'll be very speedy. I have just two main things to mention. I have a lot more than that, but just in the interest of time. First, I just wanted to say that our Kupu, AmeriCorps Kupu, Megan Gonzalez will be leaving at the end of this month. So this is her last commission meeting. I just wanted to give a quick sort of, if you can all just put your hands together and give her a sort of thank you. She has been amazing to work with and just really incredibly useful and a joy. Sort of a good but unusual combination these days, it seems like. So she's going to work for the Oahu Resource Conservation Development Council, which is possibly even longer than the name that our commission has, but we wish her all the best. And Megan, are you able to show yourself and say hi, a quick hi, and maybe just say one or two things that you've worked on?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Anu. That was really sweet. Yeah, I've been being a Kupu member based at the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, Native Ecosystems Protection Management branch, but I've worked really closely with the Climate Commission as well throughout the year. I've worked on the nature-based resilience document that was presented last commission meeting, and also working on an equity playbook with the other vistas as part of the Climate Ready Hawaii cohort. And yeah, really grateful to the entire Climate Commission, Anu and Chair Case and Evans. So thank you.
Wonderful. And she did prepare a slide presentation. We'll put it up along with the materials for the meeting so people can see what all she's worked on. And then lastly, just wanted to give you a real quick, there are four main things that I've been working on. We're putting together a grants to projects bridge, which is basically trying to connect, the funds that are left sometimes unused and projects that are left unfunded. So we're trying to create that bridge. We're also working on a toolkit for vehicle miles traveled, reduction of vehicle miles traveled on strategies and so on, from an EPA grant that has come through DOH to us. And also a climate vulnerability index, which characterizes climate vulnerabilities in Hawaii with our UH partners at the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience. Basically looking at who is most vulnerable to what and why. Just initiated that work. And then lastly, in lieu of a conference this year, we've also entered into a partnership with UH's Better Tomorrow Speaker Series. You'll remember we brought David Wallace Wells as keynote for our 2020 conference back when the world was open. We'll be partnering with them again to bring 4 intriguing climate change speakers, so possibly with appropriate associated events and so on. We also have offers of assistance from Massachusetts Polytechnic Institute. It's called Worcester Polytechnic. So if you would like to learn more about that, I've sent it out in my monthly June letter, but if you would like to know more, please get in touch with me. And for those listening in, please keep tabs on us via our Instagram and Facebook accounts. These are a window into what your commission is up to. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anu. So I think this brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. And this has been an incredibly information-rich meeting. It's so I think we'll thank you for all of the links to these documents that we'll be able to follow up on and do a little more absorbing between now and our next meeting, which is November 1st. And I think we'll all be hearing from Anu in the meantime, and we may actually have assignments. Chair Case, would you like to close the meeting?
I just want to say thank you to everyone, and to Anu and Megan for all the organization, but to everyone for your incredible. I just really love the updates section. I just think we're all doing so many really important things, and just to be able to learn from each other. What I mean, I learned just from listening to you all. So thank you all very much for all your terrific work, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha, thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Diana, do you want to stop the recording?